My fiancé cancelled our arranged marriage in front of both families because everyone knew me as a weak loser. I accepted before Celine Belmont could finish humiliating me. She had no idea I was the martial god reborn inside the body she despised. We were standing in the Hollowell reception hall. Her father sat beside mine. In our world, an arranged marriage tied two martial clans together. Canceling one publicly stained the rejected heir and weakened his family. Celine expected me to beg anyway. I looked at her and said, "I accept. I also want the engagement ended." Her prepared speech died halfway out of her mouth. My new father stopped gripping his chair. Celine's father stared at me as if the furniture had answered him. Celine herself blinked once, slow and offended. Her fingers tightened around the written cancellation agreement. She had spent years refusing the old Kieran's gifts, drunken apologies, and public scenes. This was supposed to be the clean moment when she reclaimed control in front of both households. Instead, I took the decision from her by agreeing before she could land the final insult. My new mother watched Celine, then watched me. She expected a tantrum, a threat, or another humiliating promise to change. When none came, she moved one step closer to my father. The family had clearly rehearsed for disaster. The cancellation still carried a cost. Servants would gossip. Rival clans would smell weakness. The Belmont alliance might disappear. I accepted all of it because forcing a woman to stay would only preserve the old Kieran's worst habit. The famous weak loser had been dumped, and the woman doing the dumping looked rejected. The stranger part was how relieved I felt. 3 days earlier, at Grand Martial Alliance headquarters, I had still been Alistair Varden. I was 70 years old, the Alliance leader, and the strongest martial artist alive. To understand why I welcome Celine's decision, we need to go back to the night the martial god died alone. Snow pressed against the tall windows of the Alliance Hall. I sat beneath the crest that men had spent decades killing to stand under. A senior guard reported that his wife had finally delivered their child. I asked whether it was a boy or a girl. The guard's smile faltered. "A daughter, Alliance leader. I told you yesterday." I had forgotten. My advisor, the one man allowed to tell me when I looked terrible, waited until the guard left. His eyes stayed on my hand because my fingers had begun trembling against the armrest. I asked him, "What kind of man am I?" He answered without hesitation. "The man who ended 3 wars and made every major faction obey one law." My advisor gave me the respectable version. In my 20s, I crushed cult leaders and warlords until my name became a warning. I won peace and command. I still had nobody to share one ordinary drink. My advisor stepped closer. "You should rest." I opened my mouth to insult that suggestion. Then my chest burned. My dantian, the core that stored internal energy, clenched so hard the pain folded me over. Every strand of ki I had built across 70 years began draining at once. I tried heavenly pulse circulation, my highest purification method. The energy ignored me. I tried to stand. My legs stopped cooperating. The strongest man in the martial world fell beside his own throne, without one enemy in sight. No final duel, no glorious speech. I did not even get the dignity of blaming the weather. My advisor called for the guards, but the hall stretched away from me. The last thing I saw was snow collecting against the glass. Then I opened my eyes in a room that smelled of boiled herbs. That same night, at the Hollowell estate, a 20-year-old man named Kieran Hollowell had been dragged from a pond barely alive. I woke inside his body. That much was clear. Why our deaths touched and where the original Kieran had gone remained unknown. A woman leaned over me and grabbed my face. "Trust me, waking up young loses some glamour when your new mother opens with a slap." "Kieran?" she whispered. I asked, "Who are you?" Her palm cracked across my cheek. The woman was Kieran's mother. Apparently, asking your own mother for identification was a poor opening move. A physician tried to calm her. My new mother shoved him aside and demanded that I stop pretending. I sat up, felt for my dantian, and found a contaminated puddle where an ocean used to be. Then someone held a mirror in front of me. A handsome young man stared back. Black hair, clear skin. 20 years old at most. The face had been wasted on its previous owner, which I would learn very quickly. By sunset, the household had decided the pond had damaged Kieran's memory. I let them believe it. Telling frightened strangers that a dead 70-year-old warlord had replaced their useless son seemed unwise. It also felt like a fast route back into the pond. An older servant entered, carrying fresh clothes. He took one look at me and sighed with the exhaustion of a man who had already survived too much nonsense. "Young Master Hollowell," he muttered, "you look healthier. Tragic." The servant had served Kieran for years. He was 25, loyal beyond reason, and professionally committed to hating his employer. He folded his arms. "Are we still pretending you forgot everything?" "That depends," I told him. "How convincing have I been? You asked your mother who she was and got slapped, so, honestly, stronger performance than usual." I liked him immediately. The servant extended his hand. You owe me 2 coins. Before the pond, Kieran had borrowed even from servants. I found the coins beside the bed and dropped them into his palm. He looked down, checked my face, and bit 1 coin. Then he rubbed the edge and checked my face again. Apparently, repayment from Kieran required a full fraud investigation. You repaid me, he said. You noticed. Should I call the physician back? This feels fatal. His first theory was born. Kindness meant death. He would keep it alive far longer than any reasonable man should. I asked him to explain who Kieran Hollowell had been. The professional hater did not need preparation. The body I inherited belonged to a gambler, a drinker, a coward, and a spectacularly unsuccessful romantic. Kieran avoided training, emptied family accounts, borrowed from servants, and chased Celine after she had made her disinterest painfully clear. Her final rejection ended with her fist in his face. Kieran got drunk, stumbled into the pond, and nearly drowned. The servant finished the summary and gave me a hard look. People call you trash, young master. I usually correct them. Trash can still be useful. I considered that diagnosis. Good, I said. Then the starting line is low. The servant stared at me again. Suspicion replaced the usual contempt. He had expected excuses. I had treated the entire ruined reputation like a challenge posted on a wall. The body I inherited had already dragged 2 decent parents and 1 loyal servant toward ruin. I could not ignore that bill. That loyal professional hater was Tucker Fairburn. I asked Tucker whether anyone had announced the martial god's death. He scratched his jaw. Alistair Varden? No. Why would you care? My old body had died inside the Alliance Hall, yet the martial world had heard nothing. That silence bothered me more than the new face. I got out of bed. My legs shook once, so I locked my knees and kept moving. Bring me a sword. Tucker's eyes narrowed. For training? Yes, I answered. He folded his arms. Or are we attacking Miss Belmont again? I never attacked her. Tucker gave me the look reserved for obvious lies. You tried, she finished the conversation. Fair correction. I told him romance could wait. As Alistair, I had reached the peak of ordinary swordsmanship. I still failed to enter the mental sword realm, where intent mattered more than steel. A second body gave me another attempt. Tucker returned with a practice sword and the expression of a man delivering fireworks to a child. Mora, my new mother, caught us in the corridor. Her eyes went straight to the weapon. Kieran, put it down. The fear in her voice was immediate. Years of Kieran's behavior had trained his family to expect harm whenever he held anything sharper than a spoon. I lowered the blade. Celine is safe from me, I told her. No weaker person will be bullied again. I will train, pay what I owe, and stop bringing shame into this house. Mora's hand stayed near her chest. She did not trust the promise. She still stepped aside. Over the next 3 days, I rebuilt what I could. Kieran's dantian was not truly empty. It held about 5 years of filthy, badly circulated ki. Heavenly pulse circulation stripped the waste from it and compressed the rest. The amount stayed small. The quality changed completely. By the 3rd morning, 5 dirty years had become 5 refined years. 1 solid hit from a trained ki user could still break my body. Now I had something worth hiding. Then Tucker ran into the training room. Young master, the Belmonts are here. Both of them? Tucker grimaced. Patriarch Belmont and Miss Belmont. She looks angry. Also beautiful, which feels strategically unfair. Celine was beautiful. That part of Kieran's obsession had at least involved functioning eyesight. She carried herself like every room had already been measured and found slightly beneath her. I entered the reception hall and greeted Osmond Belmont first. He was Celine's father, and the longtime friend of Gareth, my new father. He had helped arrange the match. Then I faced Celine. I apologize for my behavior before the pond, I told her. You owed me no affection. Celine's posture tightened. She had arrived prepared to fight a desperate man. Calm manners were apparently more offensive. Osmond looked at Gareth. Gareth looked at Mora. Mora watched me as if I might explode after dessert. Celine drew a breath. I came to cancel our arranged marriage. Osmond snapped her name, but she continued. Celine said she had the right to choose her husband. She wanted respect for her martial skill. She refused a life spent managing a gambler who avoided training and treated family loyalty like an endless loan. Every charge landed because every charge was true about the old Kieran. Gareth's face tightened. Mora lowered her eyes. Osmond ordered Celine to apologize for raising the matter in front of both families. I let her finish. The room waited for the tantrum it had been promised. I accept, I said. The engagement should end. I also want the right to choose my partner. Celine's gaze sharpened. You agree? I nodded. Completely, Celine pressed. After everything you did to force this marriage, I answered, that man fell into a pond. Consider the pond persuasive. Gareth covered a cough that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Osmond looked ready to argue, but my father raised one hand. If both young people refuse, Gareth said, then I won't force them. The personal engagement ended there. The old pact between the families remained technically unfinished, which would become Osmond's favorite loophole later. As the Belmonts prepared to leave, Celine stopped beside the door. "Why did you change?" she asked. I looked at the proud beauty who had expected tears and received paperwork-level relief. "Your punch hurt too much," I told her. "It knocked the simp out of me." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Beautiful. One clean hit, 3 days of consequences. After they left, I told Gareth and Maura that I wanted training, not marriage talks. Gareth gripped both of my shoulders. "You're speaking clearly. You're asking for a sword. You didn't ask me for gambling money." He looked one responsible sentence away from organizing a parade. Maura warned him not to celebrate too early. She still placed an extra bowl of food in front of me that evening. As Alistair, I had commanded thousands. That quiet dinner unsettled me more than any army. The next morning, I tried running 3 miles without chi. The body lasted 2. I forced the final mile and returned to the estate with burning lungs and shaking legs. Then I faced the deeply offensive realization that stairs now ranked among my enemies. Celine was waiting beside the front path. Osmond had ordered her to apologize properly. Pride had dragged her back, and curiosity had made her stay. Celine crossed her arms. "Understand this. I don't hate marriage because I'm admired for my appearance. My skill deserves recognition." "Reasonable." She studied my sweat-soaked clothes. "Are you training because of me?" There was enough hope in the question to make the denial satisfying. "No!" Celine's eyebrow rose. I added, "You're beautiful, talented, and still mainly the woman who punched me into a pond. The engagement is cancelled. You're free, so am I." She stepped closer. "You truly don't want me? I want functioning lungs first." Then I walked past her toward the sword ground. Celine stayed on the path, watching the weak loser leave her behind. I reached the sword ground with the engagement gone and a body everyone still expected to fail. Everyone still thought Kieran's body was useless. The next morning, in the snowy training grove, I tested whether it could carry Alistair's sword. The answer cracked the ground. I drew the practice blade and settled into the opening stance of the soul-reaping Asura sword art, my lethal signature technique. It had survived the battle demon and 3 wars. In my old body, its first movement could erase a line of charging men. In this body, using it carelessly could tear my own arm apart. The rule was simple. My mind knew 70 years of violence. My muscles had 20 years of neglect. One mistake and experience would watch from the floor while weak bones paid the bill. I moved anyway. The blade cut across the snow. Refined ki followed the edge. A white line flashed through the grove, then the ground burst several yards ahead of me. Snow sprayed over the trees. Frozen soil split into a shallow crater. I held the final stance for 1 breath. Then my wrist started shaking. The hilt had pressed a red groove into my palm, and my fingers refused to close cleanly for several breaths. My body had issued its opinion about acting legendary before breakfast. I checked my arm. No torn muscle, no cracked bone. Good. Ahead of me, the crater split the grove. Around the hilt, my fingers still refused to close. Later that day, I went to a tea house in our home region of Eastmere. I sat near the back wall and listened for news of my own death. Before Celine entered, I heard her attendant tease her near the doorway. "You came to see whether he is training for you," Celine answered too quickly. "I came because Brannon invited every young heir in Eastmere," her attendant hummed. "Naturally, the fact that Kieran is here is a tragic coincidence." Celine pushed through the door before the woman could enjoy herself further. Her attendant followed and murmured, "Then choose a table that doesn't face him." Celine chose the table facing mine. The attendant looked at the table, then at Celine. Celine gave her one warning stare and sat anyway. The cancelled engagement had lasted 3 days. Apparently, it was already living rent-free. Nothing! Merchants argued about grain. 2 swordsmen argued about a duel neither had witnessed. A drunk claimed the martial god had entered closed-door training. My corpse had apparently become shy. I considered contacting my old advisor. Then I looked at my young hands. He had spent decades identifying spies. I could not approach him as Kieran Hollowell and announce that I was his dead master. That would create questions I could not answer. Worse, I lacked the strength to survive the attention if the wrong person heard, so I kept listening. Then Celine entered with her attendant and 3 young heirs. She wore a fitted blue training coat and carried a sword at her hip. The room noticed. I noticed too. 70 years of discipline remained strong, but the 20-year-old body had opinions. "Annoying little traitor?" Her attendant set down a cup. "Those are new calluses." Celine kept her voice low. "I have eyes." "Yes, they keep returning to him." Celine lifted her cup without drinking. I pretended not to hear, which would have been more convincing if I had not been looking directly at them. Celine spotted me before I could return to my tea. Brannon Blackmere spotted her looking. Brannon was the only son of Roderick Blackmere, the creditor whose syndicate now dominated Eastmere. He dressed like inherited money, had developed legs, and learned to sneer. He walked to my table without invitation. "Young Master Hollowell," Brannon called. "I heard you started training. Did Miss Belmont's rejection finally make you useful?" Celine's attendant hid a smile behind her cup. Celine did not. Her eyes stayed on my hands, checking for calluses. I set down my tea. Training has several purposes. Brannon leaned closer. Name one you understand. Killing the person I want dead. The tea house went still around our table. I let a thread of killing intent touch him. Brannon's shoulders jerked. His right foot slid back before pride caught it. Celine saw the movement. So did one of Brannon's friends, who suddenly became fascinated by the menu. Brannon forced a laugh. Big words from a man who can't circulate chi. I smiled calmly. Celine's gaze shifted from my face to Brannon's retreating foot. She had fought enough to recognize fear, even when the owner tried to dress it as contempt. One of the young heirs beside her had laughed when Brannon approached me. He stopped now and moved his chair an inch away from Brannon's table. Celine's attendant lowered her cup and looked at me openly. Brannon noticed both reactions. His face kept darkening after I had already decided to leave. Celine blocked my path for half a second. Where did you learn to do that? Do what? Make him step back without touching him. I glanced at Brannon. Perhaps he remembered an appointment. Kieran, her tone sharpened. Celine, I matched it. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the desperate young man she had punched into the pond. She found someone enjoying her confusion more than was strictly necessary. You're different, she said. You've mentioned that twice. Careful, people may think you're interested. Her attendant made a small, choking sound. Celine stepped aside before pride forced her to answer in public. I stood. You asked what martial arts were for, I told Brannon. Now you know. Then I left him with the audience he had gathered. He could have stopped there. Naturally, he decided to make the problem larger. At sunset, back at the Hollowell estate, I asked Tucker why Brannon behaved as if he owned our roof. Tucker led me through the rear yard before answering. Half the servant rooms were empty. The armory racks had gaps where weapons should have been. 3 veteran guards trained in patched boots because replacement gear had been sold. The Blackmere Syndicate is the strongest faction in Eastmere now, Tucker said. Celine's Belmont clan is second. We fell to third. Tucker gave me a flat look. Would you like the polite answer or your answer? Mine. You gambled it away. Before I arrived, Kieran had drained operating money, lost clan funds, and forced Gareth to dismiss soldiers and servants. Then the family borrowed $200,000 from the Blackmeres. The number stopped me. 200,000? Tucker nodded. And Roderick Blackmere can demand it whenever he wants. The debt explained the empty yard. Tucker's stiff left hand pointed to a second wound. A young maid stood near the laundry steps, listening with a tray held against her chest. Her name was Nola Brierly. She served my mother and still flinched whenever I looked directly at her. I asked Nola what happened to Tucker's hand. Tucker cut in. Old injury. Nola's eyes filled. Young master, please don't punish him. I asked about Brannon. That made her look up. Nola told me Brannon had once thrown refuse across the Hollowell yard. Tucker failed to clean it fast enough. Brannon beat him in front of the servants, then made him kneel beside the trash. The original Kieran watched. Worse, he laughed. Tucker stared at the ground while Nola spoke. He had stayed beside a man who enjoyed his humiliation. Nola showed me the cracked stone near the rear gate where Tucker's head had struck. The mark remained because the household could not afford repairs. Beside the cracked stone sat empty guard posts. Debt had stripped the household, and Kieran's laughter had taught the servants not to expect help. Brannon kept returning because the first visit cost him nothing. The empty rooms had felt distant. Tucker flexed a damaged hand in front of me. Why are you still here? I asked him. Tucker shrugged. Bad career planning. He tried to make it funny. His voice missed. Nola added, he's the only person who kept saying you might change. Tucker snapped. I said the pond might have improved him. That's different. I looked at both of them. From now on, nobody uses this house to humiliate either of you. Nola nearly dropped the tray. Tucker squinted at me. That sounded responsible. Should I prepare a burial outfit? Prepare dinner. Worse. Guests are coming. That night, Roderick Blackmere arrived late for dinner with Brannon and a line of armed syndicate guards. He entered the Hollowell reception hall without apologizing. Roderick was broad, richly dressed, and careful with every movement. Brannon wanted the room to fear him. His father expected it. Gareth stood to greet him. Roderick took the best chair before my father could offer it. The road was slow, Roderick said. Grandmaster contacts kept me occupied. He mentioned powerful friends and regional deals before touching the food. Each boast carried the same message. The Hollowells needed his money so he could behave however he pleased. Roderick also brought 8 armed men into a family dinner. 4 remained by the doors. 2 stood behind his chair. The last pair wandered near the household guards and inspected the estate like future property. One tapped a repaired pillar and asked whether the warehouse roofs leaked. He was already pricing what his leader planned to take. Cormac Stonebridge, our guard captain, heard him. His hand flexed at his side, but the patched uniforms behind him explained why he stayed still. Roderick did not need to draw a sword. The debt had been doing that work for months. My mother's jaw tightened. My father absorbed the disrespect because the debt was real. Brannon looked at me across the table. The tea-house fear had fermented into anger. The beggar heir is quiet tonight, he said. Perhaps he finally remembers who paid for this meal. I kept eating. Brannon tapped the table. $200,000, Kieran. That's what your family owes because you couldn't stop gambling. I know, I answered. He had expected denial. You admit it? The old Kieran was trash. You're not revealing state secrets. A servant behind Gareth lowered his face to hide a reaction. Brannon's cheeks darkened. I stood. Restraint was still the sensible move. The body could outthink Brannon, but one clean key-powered hit would break ribs. Starting a faction war at dinner would also hand Roderick exactly the excuse he wanted, so I turned to leave. Brannon needed the last word. Brannon caught Nola by the wrist as she passed with a wine jar. "Stay," Brannon ordered her. "If your young master won't entertain us, you can." The maid tried to pull free. Brannon tightened his grip until the jar slipped and shattered. Tucker stepped between them. "Let her go." Brannon backhanded him. Tucker hit the floor. Before he could rise, Brannon planted a boot on his injured hand and pressed down. Every servant saw what the debt had bought. My father started forward. Roderick lifted one finger. "Young men settle young men's disputes," the loan shark said. Brannon ground his heel harder. Tucker's face went white. Nola dropped beside them. "Please, I'll take his place." Brannon shoved her away, then spat onto the stone floor beside Tucker's face. "Clean it," Brannon ordered. Tucker's jaw clenched. Brannon smiled at me. "With your mouth. Let your master see what his debt buys." In less than a minute, he grabbed a maid and crushed a loyal man's hand. Then he tried to turn a human being into a floor rag. The previous Kieran had laughed once. I walked back. "Tucker," I said, "don't move." Brannon looked delighted. "Finally, are you going to apologize for him?" I crouched first and checked Tucker's hand. No fresh break. Painful, swollen, usable. Then I stood between Brannon and the servants. "Captain Stonebridge," I called. Cormac straightened beside the wall. He was a veteran. The old Kieran had helped impoverish, and his men had spent the entire dinner swallowing shame. "Captain," I said, "have every Hollowell guard watch closely." Cormac looked at Gareth. My father did not stop him. The guards turned toward us. Brannon's smile thinned. "Watch what?" I pointed at the spit. "The person who put it there will clean it." Brannon stared. I met his eyes. "Use your own mouth." Nola stopped crying. Tucker lifted his head. One Blackmere guard glanced at Brannon instead of me. Brannon laughed once, too loudly. "You're ordering me? I am giving you one chance. Release the maid, apologize to Tucker, clean your filth, then leave." My calm smile returned. Tucker saw it and whispered, "Oh, he is cooked." Brannon heard him, his face twisted. Chi gathered around his fist, bright enough for every guard in the room to see. One clean hit from that fist could fold Kieran's weak body. Brannon rejected the apology. Then he swung. Brannon's Kai-powered fist crossed the courtyard fast enough to kill the old Kieran. My mind had watched better men throw that punch for 50 years. The danger was getting this body out of the way. I shifted half a step left. His knuckles passed my cheek close enough to move my hair. The stone behind me cracked when his fist missed and struck the pillar. Keep that pillar in mind. One clean hit would have done the same thing to my ribs. Brannon expected resistance and punched empty air instead. Before he could pull back, I drove my palm under his jaw. His teeth snapped together. His head kicked backward. I turned the same hand, struck his elbow, and forced his arm across his own chest. Then I stepped behind his ankle and swept. Brannon hit the ground hard enough to lose the breath he had planned to use for boasting. Nola backed against the wall with both hands over her mouth. A Blackmere guard looked from the cracked pillar to Brannon on the stones and loosened his jaw. Cormac did the opposite. The Hollowell captain placed one hand on his sword and stood straighter. "Two witnesses! Two different conclusions!" Brannon rolled up with blood at one corner of his mouth. The Blackmere men had seen him win dozens of courtyard matches by overwhelming weaker opponents with ki. Their confidence depended on a simple picture. Brannon attacked, the other person broke, and Roderick collected the respect afterward. My half-step had damaged that picture more than the palm strike. A servant near the kitchen door whispered my name. Another servant pulled Tucker farther from the open ground. Cormac glanced at the cracked pillar, then at the narrow space where I had stood. He understood the danger. I was winning by inches because inches were all the body could afford. "Cheap trick," Brannon snarled. "You'll get beaten up," I told him. He lunged again. This time he threw 3 punches and a low kick, feeding chi into each attack. His technique was strong enough to bully local heirs. It was also loud. His shoulders announced every strike before his hands moved. I slipped the first punch, redirected the second, and let the third scrape my sleeve. The kick came lower than I expected. It clipped my calf and sent pain through the weak leg. Pain shot through the calf. A clean hit would have cracked the bone. My experience could read Brannon. It could not grant the body new material, so I stopped giving him room. I stepped inside his reach and struck his ribs with 2 short palms. The first collapsed his guard, the second dumped his breath. When he bent, I hooked his neck and drove 1 knee into his chest. Brannon staggered into the dinner table. Bowls jumped, wine crossed the cloth. Roderick's untouched cup rolled off the edge and shattered beside his boot. His father watched the cup instead of his son. Brannon grabbed the table and tried to rise. I kicked the support out from under his arm. His face met the wood. The spoiled heir had entered this house calling people dogs. Now he was crawling under dinner plates while both families watched. You can admire the confidence only by ignoring every fact in the courtyard. Staying down would have ended the fight, but pride dragged him up again. Brannon spat blood and screamed at the syndicate guards. "Kill him!" Steel cleared sheets around the courtyard. Cormac drew first. The Hollowell guards followed him. Men who had spent months in patched boots now stood between the Blackmeres and the servants they had bullied. Roderick finally rose from his chair. "Captain Stonebridge," he warned, "think about the debt before you make this worse." Cormac's eyes stayed on Brannon. "I'm thinking about the Blade Order syndicate leader." One Blackmere guard looked at another. They had come to collect respect, not die in somebody else's family tantrum. Brannon saw the hesitation and went feral. He pulled a narrow knife from inside his sleeve. The blade was meant to stay hidden until it entered someone. Drawing it turned the brawl into attempted murder. Celine's name had bruised his pride at the tea house. Tucker's refusal bruised it again. My first counter shattered what remained. He had received 3 exits and used everyone as a staircase downward. He rushed me with the knife aimed under my ribs. I waited until the steel crossed my sleeve. Then I caught his wrist. My fingers closed around the joint. I turned once. The wrist broke with a hard pop. Brannon screamed. The knife fell. I caught it before it touched the floor and threw it into the table beside Roderick's hand. His father jerked back, his first unplanned movement that night. The knife quivered beside his fingers. 2 Blackmere guards who had started forward stopped at once. Nola looked from the hidden blade to Brannon. Tucker's good hand closed against the wall behind him. The weapon had just told every witness which side tried to turn dinner into murder. Roderick checked his men. Nobody volunteered to pretend otherwise. I pulled Brannon forward by the broken wrist and drove my shoulder into his chest. 2 ribs gave. He folded. I struck his mouth with the heel of my palm and several teeth scattered across the stone. Then I kicked his legs out and put him flat beside the spit he had ordered Tucker to lick. The trash label had found a better owner. Brannon tried to lift his head. I pressed one foot against his shoulder and looked at Roderick. "Your son attacked servants and used chi against a weak household. He ordered armed men to kill me, then drew a concealed blade after losing." Roderick's face hardened. "Take your foot off him! Make me!" The Blackmere guards shifted. Cormac moved with his men. Hollowell's steel formed a line behind me. Tucker had dragged himself upright against the wall. His injured hand shook, but he placed the young maid behind him anyway. Cormac saw the stomped servants still shielding someone else, and his grip tightened. Roderick looked at the swords, the servants, and his broken son. Then he struck the nearest Blackmere guard across the face. "Useless," he barked. "All of you watched this happen." The guard stumbled into another man. Nobody defended him. Roderick hit a second guard. He still had not asked whether Brannon could breathe. Tucker whispered, "Excellent father, very normal family." The danger had passed enough for one line. I almost smiled. Roderick pointed at me. "You've crippled my heir. The Blackmere Syndicate will answer this. Your heir authored it. You think witnesses will protect you?" Before I could answer, my father stepped into the courtyard. My father had spent dinner absorbing insult because our debt placed the household under a blade. Now Brannon lay broken, the hidden knife sat beside Roderick, and every servant had seen the cruelty that caused it. My father picked up the knife by its handle. "Your son used internal ki on a servant," he said. "He attacked my heir inside my home. He ordered armed men to kill him. Then he drew this after losing." Roderick's jaw tightened. Kieran provoked him. Gareth drove the knife into the table. "Be grateful I'm not sending witnesses through Eastmere before dawn." Roderick opened his mouth. Gareth left one hand on the knife. No Blackmere guard stepped forward, and one looked toward the gate. My father had named every charge before Roderick could steal the story. One Blackmere guard looked down. Another eased away from Brannon's body, making the social distance visible. Cormac turned his sword point toward the ground, but he did not sheath it. Roderick could no longer sell Brannon as an innocent victim, so he reached for the leverage that remained. My father checked the servants, ordered the young maid behind my mother, and sent for a physician. Roderick had arrived giving orders. Now my father gave them around him. The loan shark saw the shift and made his last move. "The $200,000 is due," he said. "Immediately." My mother went pale. Roderick bent toward his son at last. He did not touch him. He ordered 2 guards to lift Brannon and warned Gareth that patience had ended. I removed my foot and let them carry the spoiled heir away. Brannon's head rolled toward me as the guards passed. One eye had swollen shut. The other held enough hate to start another war. He had lost the fight, the room, and his father's respect. He still believed revenge would return all three. After the Blackmeres left, the guard captain faced me in the ruined courtyard. His guards waited behind him. "Young master," the captain said, "what are your orders?" Yesterday these men would have ignored me unless my father repeated the command. Tonight, they waited. "Protect the household," I told them. "No servant kneels to a creditor again. Anyone who enters this estate follows our rules." Cormac pressed one fist to his chest. His men copied him. That salute was small compared with an army bowing. It hit harder. Tucker limped over after the young maid wrapped his hand. "You stayed. It would be strange to start the fight and leave you with the bill," Tucker muttered. "The old you specialized in that," I told him. "Then enjoy the upgrade." Tucker looked at Brannon's blood on the stones. "Roderick will come after you." "Indirectly," I said. "He can't admit his son lost fairly. He'll hire someone, spread a story, or attack the family where he thinks I'm weak." My father heard me. "How can you know? Men like Roderick protect status before family." He hit his guards before checking Brannon. "Revenge will be business dressed as grief." My father studied me for a long moment. He had seen a useless son fight like a veteran and read an enemy like an advisor. Questions crowded his face. He asked only one. "Why did you act?" I looked at Tucker's bandaged hand and the maid's broken wine jar. "Because Brannon humiliated the Hollowells in our own home. Because these people stayed when I gave them reasons to leave. That ends now." My father nodded once. Tucker cleared his throat. "Young master, thank you." I glanced at him. "Do not make it emotional. We may be buried together soon." His gratitude vanished under immediate panic. Together? Why together? I wasn't informed of the burial plan. The captain's mouth twitched. The young maid laughed through the last of her tears. Then the bill arrived. Late that night, after the courtyard had been cleaned, I passed my parents' room and heard my mother open a wooden box. I stopped outside the door. Inside, a necklace clicked softly against the table. It was old, heavy, and set with the only stones my mother had kept. I had seen her wear it once in the 3 days since waking. She removed it before cooking and returned it to the box with both hands. Kieran would probably have viewed it as another object he could someday sell. Now my mother placed it beside the debt notice without hesitation. "Sell it," she told my father. "It will cover part of the debt." My father answered, "It was your mother's. Kieran is our son." There was no joke in the room. My mother pushed the necklace toward him and my father covered her hand with his. "We'll protect him," my father said, "even if the clan loses everything else." I stood outside with Brannon's blood still dried on my sleeve. As Alistair, thousands had praised me. Nobody had ever placed a family heirloom on a table and chosen me over it. I left before they opened the door. The debt was mine now, whether Kieran created it or not. Roderick would be shopping for a hired killer by morning. My parents were preparing to sell their last precious thing. I had no intention of letting either plan finish. By sunrise, I was in a carriage with Tucker, heading toward the faction where Roderick had begun shopping for a mercenary. Breaking one spoiled heir had turned dinner into a march toward the man buying a killer. Breaking Brannon had called in the debt and sent Roderick shopping for a killer. Before sunrise, Tucker and I were in a carriage toward the Blackmere compound, the creditor faction's headquarters. He looked increasingly certain I planned to kill him. He had reasons. I had dragged him from bed before sunrise and packed 2 swords. My bag held enough money for several days. A finished plan would have been useful. I did not have one. Tucker watched the trees pass. "Young master, why am I coming?" "There is a good answer and a bad answer," I told him. He braced himself against the seat. "Start with the good one. I trust you." His face softened despite his best efforts. "The bad answer? If this fails, I need someone to identify the body." Tucker leaned toward the driver. "Turn around." The good answer was bait. I pulled him back by the collar. I learned after Tucker returned that a Blackmere maid had been listening outside the council room while our carriage moved. Brannon demanded an open massacre. Roderick rejected it only because public slaughter would expose the family, then hired the grave mastiff for deniable violence. Brannon had another chance to stop. He chose the hired killer. In the carriage, I studied my family's Hollowell clan Moonfall sword art. The manual was clean, practical, and painfully average. Tucker peered over my shoulder. "Bad? Average." He looked offended on behalf of several dead ancestors. "It's our family art. That doesn't make it less average." I turned a page. The footwork had decent balance. The finishing cuts were predictable. A master could still kill with it. Tucker asked, "Then what makes a clan strong?" "A clan's relationship with the martial world matters more than pedigree," I told him. "People, debts, favors, information, and enemies. A famous manual helps, but paper doesn't swing itself." He nodded slowly. Tucker knew servants, kitchens, doors, and the way frightened people spoke when powerful men were not listening. I knew war. For this job, his face could open more doors than my sword. That night, at a roadside inn outside the Blackmere territory, I broke every master-servant rule Tucker understood. I rented 1 room. Tucker stopped in the doorway. 1 bed. "You can count. This confirms the murder theory. You're saving money before disposing of me. I tossed him the blanket. Sleep on the floor. Ah, familiar cruelty. I feel safer already. Downstairs, I ordered food and told him to sit at my table. Tucker remained standing. Servants don't drink with their masters. You're not useful to me while performing furniture. Sit. He sat like the chair might report him. I poured 2 cups. Tucker touched his only after I drank first. Poison? I asked. You've been kind for almost a day. I'm checking all theories. I laughed once. It surprised both of us. The inn was loud enough to hide our voices. I told Tucker that if he wanted to stay beside me, he needed to stop thinking like property. He could disagree, question orders, and protect his own life. Tucker stared into his cup. You really changed. The pond was excellent. I recommend it to difficult relatives. His mouth twitched, then turned serious. How did you become this strong in 3 days? The full answer would expose the reincarnation secret. I told him Celine's punch had awakened skills the old Kieran had buried. It was weak as explanations went, but Kieran's memory loss and sudden discipline had already trained the household to accept strange answers. Tucker looked unconvinced. So I gave him a truth instead. Never show everything you can do, I said. Keep 30% hidden. If an enemy knows your limit, he can price your death. Tucker asked, how much are you hiding? I answered, enough. Tucker leaned back. That sounded like 80%. Good, you're learning, I told him. Then I made him a promise. I will not return to the man who laughed while Brannon beat you. Whatever happened to Kieran in that pond, that version is gone. Tucker's grip tightened around the cup. He did not thank me. He nodded once. For the rest of the meal, Tucker stopped checking whether I drank first. He stole the last piece of meat from my plate instead. Small theft, major diplomatic progress. The next morning, outside the inn, I gave Tucker his first real mission. Enter the Blackmere territory. Listen to the servants. Find the mercenary, the attack plan, and any weakness inside the compound. His confidence vanished. Alone? I told him. You know how servants move. I don't. Tucker asked. What if they catch me? I answered. Tell them where I am. Tucker stared. You want me to betray you? I held his gaze. If torture starts, yes. Give them my room, my route, and my breakfast order. Loyalty that gets you killed before delivering anything is just bad math. Tucker stared at me. You're ordering me to snitch, I nodded, aggressively. He adjusted the straw hat I had bought him. I always knew my face would become our greatest asset. Your face is forgettable, that's the asset. He left offended and motivated. I did not shadow him. Following would tell him I trusted my own judgment more than his ability, so I waited. 1 day passed, then 2. By the 4th night, I had worn a groove into the inn floor and considered attacking the compound without him. The thought lasted 2 sentences. Then the window slid open. A dirty traveler climbed inside wearing a straw hat and half a beard. I drew my sword. The traveler squeaked. My face works on women, but this is excessive. Tucker pulled off the beard. I lowered the blade. You're late. I was busy becoming a legendary intelligence officer. He had earned the brag. A maid inside the Blackmere compound helped Tucker because Brannon had killed staff before and threatened more. Tucker had spent the first day carrying kitchen water and letting guards treat him as invisible. By the second, the servants stopped lowering their voices around him. He learned Grave Mastiff was recruiting vagabonds for a deniable strike. Roderick's men were also spreading a story about me attacking women. Tucker earned the maid's trust by listening instead of promising a rescue he could not yet deliver. She gave him the location of Brannon's rooms and warned him about the engaged servant Brannon was threatening. 4 days earlier, Tucker had been afraid to sit at my table. Now he spread the enemy compound across it and corrected my first route with one dirty finger. I would cross here, I said. You would be seen, Tucker replied. He moved my finger to the blind corner. Use this wall. I changed the route. The servant Kieran, once treated like furniture, had become the most useful person in the room. Tucker caught me looking and straightened. Try not to look impressed. It damages my humble servant disguise. The smear was ugly because it was believable. Kieran's reputation supplied half the lie for free. Tucker placed a rough compound sketch on the table. Brannon threatened her fiancé. He's using the man to control her. My hand stopped over the map. Where? Tucker pointed. Retreating to the estate would protect me for 1 night and leave that woman inside. Waiting for proof would let Roderick finish hiring his army. So I tied a plain cloth mask over Kieran's face and went to the compound before dawn. The cloth hid my face. Dark clothes hid the Hollowell colors. Tucker remained at the inn because one scout success did not make him ready for a fortified raid. I crossed the rear wall where his map showed a blind corner. Inside, a servant hurried past with her head down. I followed the sound of Brannon's voice to a private room. He had the engaged maid pinned near a table. Her sleeve was torn at the shoulder where she had tried to pull away. Brannon held a letter bearing her fiancé's name. Serve me, he told her, or he dies before sunset. The maid shook so hard the table rattled. I opened the door. Brannon turned. Who are you? I closed the distance before he could call the guards. One strike to the maid's neck sent her safely unconscious into my arm. I lowered her behind the table. She had already endured enough. She did not need the killing in her memory. Brannon reached for a bell. His injured hand missed the cord once. I let him grab again, then cut it. The bell struck the floor without ringing. For the first time, Brannon had no guards, no father, and no debt protecting him. He backed away on his injured legs. "Do you know who my father is? A man who taught you that weak people exist for your appetite." Brannon's face tightened. "How much did the Hollowells pay you?" I pulled down the cloth mask. His remaining color left. "Kieran, you threatened her fiancé because nobody could stop you. Debt made Tucker an animal in your eyes, so you stomped him. Then losing embarrassed you enough to draw a knife." He grabbed a short sword with his good hand. "My father will kill everyone you love." The threat decided it. I stepped through his desperate slash and drove my blade into his chest. Brannon's eyes widened. He looked down, then back at me, still waiting for family status to reverse steel. It did not. I pulled the blade free and caught him before he fell onto the maid. "You kept choosing the weaker person," I said. "Tonight you chose wrong." I lowered him to the floor and checked the maid's breathing. "Steady." The letter bore her fiancé's name. I placed it in her hand so she would have proof when she woke. No joke belonged in that room. I pulled the cloth mask back up and moved toward the council wing. Minutes later, outside Roderick's council room, I heard Stellan Carrick arguing with his leader. Stellan was the vice leader who kept the Blackmere Syndicate operating, while father and son treated it like a personal weapon. "An attack on every Hollowell servant destroys our standing," Stellan told him. His speech was clipped and exact. "No clan will trust our contracts afterward." Grave Mastiff laughed from inside. "Trust doesn't collect territory." The mercenary wanted a decision because his men were already assembled. Roderick answered, "The Hollowells have land, warehouses, and a weakened guard force. Their debt gives us the story. Their debts give us the property." Revenge had grown into a hostile takeover. Stellan pushed his chair back. "Then find another vice leader. I will not manage slaughter." Roderick called him disposable. Stellan walked out. He had reached the courtyard when Roderick shouted the final order through the open doors. "Kill every Hollowell, servants, guards, family. Kill their dogs too." Stellan stopped beneath the eaves. I stepped onto the roof edge above him. He looked up without reaching for his sword. "Smart man, Vice Leader Carrick," I said through the mask. "Wait here if you want your life to change before sunrise." Stellan studied the blood on my blade. "Whose life did you change first?" "Brannon's, permanently." He glanced toward the room where the spoiled heir had been keeping the maid. A servant was running down the corridor for help. Stellan saw the direction, the blood, and the absence of Brannon's guards. He did not need my full account. His eyes closed for one brief second. When they opened, he was calculating. The son was dead. The father still had Grave Mastiff, armed guards, and an extermination order moving toward my family. I crossed the roof toward the council entrance. Only Roderick and the mercenary remained between me and the takeover. I entered Roderick's council room with my own face hidden beneath the plain cloth mask. Once the door closed behind me, I pulled the cloth down. The room held Roderick, Grave Mastiff, 6 syndicate guards, and a table covered with maps of Hollowell property. Every face turned toward the weak heir they were planning to erase. Roderick rose slowly. "Kieran Hollowell, correct. Your security needs work." One guard glanced at the locked door behind me. Another looked toward the ceiling as if I might have fallen through it. Grave Mastiff only smiled. The mercenary stood nearly a head taller than everyone else. His weapon was a 2-handed iron mace with a head wide enough to break a horse. The title had come from the way he hunted wounded men after battles. He rolled one shoulder. "You know who I am?" "Grave Mastiff." He looked pleased. "Good," I added. "I prefer knowing what to write on the grave." "The pleasure left," Roderick pointed at me. $5,000 to the man who takes him alive. 50,000 if he dies resisting." Grave Mastiff gripped the mace. "I prefer the larger number." He swung before the guards cleared the table. The mace smashed through the chair beside me and buried itself in the stone floor. The impact threw splinters across the room. One piece cut my cheek. You can probably see why I did not let him swing cleanly twice. A direct hit would not bruise this body, it would end it. I moved behind the weapon's arc and cut at his shoulder. Grave Mastiff twisted, letting armor catch the edge. He was faster than his size suggested. Better, too. Roderick had hired one real killer among a room full of uniforms. The mercenary ripped the mace free and reversed it toward my ribs. I barely stepped outside the swing. Wind from the iron head struck my coat. My weak legs slipped on broken stone, and the mace clipped the table hard enough to split it down the center. The shock traveled through the floor and numbed my ankle. Grave Mastiff noticed. So did Roderick. The loan shark's shoulders loosened because he finally saw the weak body beneath the impossible technique. One guard raised his sword again after starting to lower it. My near fall had returned courage to the room. Grave Mastiff widened his stance and smiled. He thought he had found the body's limit. Good. A confident killer commits more weight than a cautious one. Men who believed the fight was over became careful. My slip gave them courage, so they committed harder. Roderick backed toward the wall. One guard dropped his sword while trying to avoid the flying maps. Celine had been right outside. The entire takeover could still fail because my body lost 1 inch. Grave Mastiff saw the slip and charged. Your reputation was generous, he said. You're still a child. My knees agree. I let him believe the stumble had exposed my limit. He raised the mace overhead for the kill. The overhead strike committed his shoulders, hips, and sightline. Back in Alistair's body, I had survived men who hid 3 attacks inside that motion. Grave Mastiff had one. I stepped forward instead of back. The mace crashed behind me. My blade entered the opening under his arm. I turned through the first movement of the soul-reaping Asura sword art and pulled the cut across his centerline. Grave Mastiff froze. The mace handle slipped from his fingers. He looked at the wound, then at my sword, as if the technique had violated a contract. I struck once more and dropped him beside the broken table. The hired ace had entered the room as Roderick's final answer. He left it as floor damage. One syndicate guard took a full step backward. Another lowered his blade without being told. Roderick's bookkeeper, pressed near the safe, started quietly moving away from his employer. Witnesses do not need speeches when their feet have already voted. Roderick drew his sword. I flicked blood from mine. You can still surrender. You killed my son. Your son threatened an innocent woman's fiancée and tried to force himself on her. Roderick's face did not change. He glanced at the watching guards before looking back at me. Status had taken the deeper wound. Roderick lunged. His technique had power, but fear shortened every motion. I parried twice, cut his thigh, and struck his sword hand. The weapon dropped. He stumbled into the wall beside a large iron safe. I heard the lock turn before I saw his decision. Roderick yanked the safe open. Stacks of cash filled the lower shelves. Gold and portable valuables sat above them. The total came to $320,000. Money changed his voice immediately. Take it, he said. All of it. We can settle the debt. I can make you regional leader. The guards looked from the open safe to me. The bookkeeper stopped moving. Roderick had converted his own treasury into a public surrender flag. You taught Brannon that the strong can do anything to the weak, I said. Roderick swallowed. I picked up Grave Mastiff's mace. Tonight, you're the weak one. His own creed returned just before the iron head struck. Roderick fell beside the safe he had mistaken for mercy. A guard dropped his sword before Roderick stopped moving. A second followed. The bookkeeper knelt without anyone asking. The remaining men looked toward the door, waiting for a leader who no longer existed. I called Celine inside. He entered, took in Grave Mastiff, Roderick, the open safe, and the surrendered guards. His expression barely moved, but his hand stopped halfway to his sword. Vice Leader Carrick, I said, congratulations, you've been promoted. Celine looked at Roderick's body. To what? Leader of the Blackmere Syndicate, I answered. His eyes returned to the corpse. You killed the current leader. That's why the position opened. One guard made a choking noise that could have been fear or badly timed laughter. Celine ignored him. Why me? The surrendered guards watched Celine instead of me. He had kept their wages paid and warned Roderick against the massacre. The room already treated him like the adult left standing. You argued against killing my family when obedience would have been safer. You know the organization. You're also the highest-ranking person in this room who hasn't annoyed me. His gaze moved to the safe. And what do you want? The syndicate operates under you. The Hollowells stay untouched. Servants are off limits. Send useful information when larger factions move. In public, we remain enemies if that keeps you alive. Celine studied me, then glanced at the guards in the open safe. And if I refuse? Then I leave you in a room with 6 armed men, 2 dead leaders, and an empty succession plan. He looked at the guards. They looked away first. I accept, Celine said. Before dawn, Celine locked the victory into one story. He confined every guard who had heard the extermination order. He left Grave Mastiff's mace beside Roderick and arranged the bodies around the broken table. His bookkeeper emptied the safe into travel bags. Then Celine announced that the mercenary had turned on Roderick over money and died in the struggle. Brannon had vanished earlier. When one guard looked to me for instructions, Celine cut him off and gave the order himself. By sunrise, the room obeyed its new leader. The ugly story only needed to survive the first questions. I took the $320,000 and left through the same wall Tucker had mapped. The next morning, Tucker waited beside the inn door with a sword in both hands. His face was pure panic. He saw me, looked for wounds, then noticed the travel bags. You're alive! Disappointing, I know. Tucker dropped the sword and grabbed my shoulders. Brannon? Dead, I answered. His grip tightened. Roderick? Also dead. Tucker looked at the torn sleeve and the dried blood beneath it. Grave Mastiff? His title became accurate. Tucker sat down very slowly, as though the chair needed time to become trustworthy. I opened one bag. Cash filled it to the rim. His eyes widened. You robbed them? I collected the debt, interest, emotional damages, and a late fee, I told him. Tucker stared into the bag. That's $320,000, a very late fee. Tucker looked from the money to the blood on my sleeve. What happens if someone tries to kill the Hollowells again? I closed the bag. They die. Tucker looked from the blood to the money, his grip on the chair eased by one finger. I placed a sword on the table between us. I will teach you real martial arts. Tucker blinked. Me? You scouted a hostile faction, returned with useful information, and tried to protect a maid with a broken hand. You're already more valuable than half the men carrying titles in Eastmere. He touched the sheath but did not take it. Why did you stay all these years? I asked. Tucker stared at the table. Then he told me about a winter long before Kieran became cruel. Tucker had been 15 and sick with a fever. The household expected him to die. 10-year-old Kieran sat beside the bed, changed the wet cloth on his forehead, and stayed through the night. It was one good act buried beneath years of failure. I kept waiting for that boy to come back, Tucker said. Kieran had not been born rotten. Years of worse choices had buried the child who once cared. I pushed the sword closer. Stop waiting. Stand beside me instead. Tucker slid from the chair and knelt. I, Tucker Fairburn, will serve as your subordinate. Not servant. Subordinate. You train, question stupid orders, and survive. He looked up. Can I still complain? You would explode if prevented. He took the sword. Back at the Hollowell estate, Gareth greeted news of the Blackmere deaths as a miracle. He still ordered the household manager to prepare repayment of the $200,000. A debt remains a debt, he said. The loan shark was dead. My father still intended to protect the Hollowell name. I looked at him and said, Father, keep the money. The debt has been settled. The words stopped him. Mora turned from the doorway. Gareth's eyes reddened before he looked away. He did not ask why I knew. He placed one hand on my shoulder. Welcome home, son. Gareth squeezed my shoulder once and released me. Mora stood beside him with the heirloom box still in her hands. She closed it and carried it back toward her room. The necklace stayed in the family because the money had arrived before sacrifice became irreversible. Nola saw the box leave the study and covered a relieved smile with both hands. Later that day, in the guard yard, I handed Cormac Stonebridge $30,000. The captain stared at the bag. Young master, what is this? Back wages, replacement equipment, and recruitment money, I answered. Cormac pushed the bag back an inch. The guards can endure. I pushed it toward him again. Their families can't eat endurance. Cormac opened the bag, saw the amount, and closed it again. Two nearby guards stopped pretending not to listen. I failed these men before, I said. Repair what can be repaired. Cormac pressed his fist to his chest. This time the salute carried no hesitation. Within days, boots were replaced, empty posts filled, and the estate sounded alive again. The money fixed visible wounds. My body still carried one I could not pay away so easily. Two major chi channels were blocked. Without opening them, my refined energy would remain capped, and every serious fight would keep gambling the body against one clean hit. So I went to Ridgemont, the nearest city with a black market. The black market elder showed me a dried root sealed inside a jade box. Millennium spirit root, he said. 10 to 15 years of chi for an ordinary cultivator. With heavenly pulse circulation, I could extract the upper end and force the blocked channels open. Price? $440,000. I had spent $30,000 on Cormac. Even with the syndicate money, I was $150,000 short. The elder watched my face. Why do you need power so badly? Filial piety. He laughed until he coughed. I did not. As Alistair, I became the strongest man alive after the person I once wanted to impress was already gone. This time, I had parents waiting at home. The elder's laughter faded. He closed the jade box. 10 days! Bring the full amount, and I'll hold it! On the 11th, it goes to the next buyer. A $440,000 root sat within reach. I had 10 days and a $150,000 hole. The spirit root waited. My money did not. 3 days into the deadline, I was still $150,000 short. I could have ordered Stellan to empty more Blackmere accounts. I refused. Roderick had treated every subordinate like a wallet with legs. Installing Stellan and immediately doing the same thing would make the takeover a costume change, so I paced the Hollowell study and reviewed the debts Kieran had left behind. Tucker watched from the doorway for several minutes, then he sighed. You miss Miss Belmont. I stopped. What? You stare out windows, forget meals, and glare at furniture. Classic romance. I'm missing $150,000, I corrected him. Tucker's sympathy died. Ah, a more expensive woman. Tucker had decided Celine explained every unexplained mood. It saved him from learning finance. I made him sit and tell me exactly how the Hollowells acquired the Blackmere loan. Kieran had been kidnapped after leaving a gambling den. Rylan Crowhurst, the criminal who grabbed him, demanded $150,000 in ransom. Fenton Whitcomb led the nearby Grand Marshal Alliance branch in Brookhaven. The corrupt official pretended to rescue Kieran and charged the family another $50,000. The Hollowells borrowed $200,000 from Roderick to pay both amounts. Tucker's mouth tightened. Your father sold land. Your mother sold jewelry. The blackmares covered the rest. Did anyone investigate Ryland's link to Fenton? Fenton led the investigation. Of course he did. The crooked official had robbed the family, sold them his own rescue, and then used Alliance authority to certify the lie. Very efficient corruption. I almost respected the greed. Almost. Ryland and Fenton had created the money gap themselves. I decided they could fill it. That afternoon in Ridgemont, I paid $10,000 for a skin mask. It reproduced the face of Colby Northcott, an obscure nephew from the High Crest sword sect. Colby lived in seclusion, and Fenton had never met him. The mask was only leather, pigment, and good craftsmanship. The real disguise was status. Fenton feared the Northcott name because Osric Northcott led one of the strongest sects in the martial world. Fear would handle the details his eyes missed. I changed clothes, tied my hair differently, and entered the Grand Martial Alliance branch in Brookhaven. The front guards barely looked at me until I named Highcrest. Then one ran ahead. A clerk who had been slouching behind a desk stood so quickly his chair fell backward. Another clerk offered tea before asking why I was there. Fake authority had opened the building before the mask did. Fenton Whitcomb hurried from his office. He was round-faced, richly dressed, and eager in the way corrupt men become eager around people who can promote them. A silver Alliance badge hung prominently at his belt. The clerk who had ignored 3 waiting petitioners now rushed to polish Fenton's chair before I sat. Another clerk carried away a widow's complaint because the branch leader did not want poverty visible around a Highcrest guest. Fenton's authority filled that hallway. The weak waited. The powerful received tea. He had built his career around guessing which side of a door mattered. Colby Northcott, Fenton said, bowing deeply. The Brookhaven branch is honored. You should hear how quickly corruption becomes polite around a bigger surname. I let him remain bent a little too long. Then I entered his office and took his chair. His smile twitched. He sat across from his own desk. I'm looking for Ryland Crowhurst, I told him. Fenton's fingers froze on the teapot. I had the right man. A common criminal, he said. Why would Highcrest care? Powerful elders believe he has been using Alliance protection. They want his head and the official who helped him. Fenton set the teapot down very carefully. Terrible accusation. Find him first, and I can recommend you for a position at Alliance headquarters. Greed beat fear across his face. Fenton leaned closer. I may have heard he frequents a gambling den in Ridgemont. He had sold his partner in one sentence. Then he gave me the gambling den and its rear entrance. The imaginary promotion had already sold his partner. I let him pour fresh tea. His hands steadied as if the dangerous part had passed. Good. Greed had returned, and a greedy man would bring the money himself. I placed a written bounty notice on the desk. Ryland carried an official $50,000 bounty. You will prepare $200,000, I said. Fenton blinked. The bounty is $50,000. The extra covers travel, discretion, and my inconvenience. Fenton's smile strained. That's $150,000 extra. Good. Your arithmetic qualifies you for headquarters, I told him. He gripped the teacup. I can't authorize that amount. I stood. The clerks outside stopped whispering. The clerk who had carried away the widow's complaint opened the office door a little wider. Fenton saw him listening and lowered his voice. I raised mine. Then I'll tell the Highcrest elders that branch leader Whitcomb protected Ryland, refused cooperation, and argued over money. Fenton rose with both palms out. No need for that. $200,000 can be arranged. By the time I left, Fenton had promised the full $200,000 and named a private meeting point outside Ridgemont. He kept asking when the fake promotion would arrive. When I crossed the hallway, the clerks bowed to me first. Fenton saw it through the open door. The badge still hung at his belt, but the room had already found a larger authority. I expected a refund. That evening, at the gambling den, Ryland sat in a rear room counting money from 3 frightened players. He was broad-shouldered, scarred, and careless because an Alliance branch leader had protected him for years. I waited until the players left, then I locked the door. Ryland reached for the knife under the table. Who are you? Someone you kidnapped. He laughed at Colby's face. I kidnapped many people. I crossed the room before the knife cleared the table and pinned his wrist against the wood. The first strike broke 2 fingers. The second put his shoulder out of position. He stopped laughing. I removed the mask. Ryland stared at Kieran Hollowell. Recognition traveled through him in stages. First came disbelief, then he checked the locked door. Finally, he looked toward the ceiling as though Fenton's protection might descend through it. The gambling den outside kept roaring. Nobody inside the room knew the protected criminal was now trapped. You drowned, he whispered. Poorly. Ryland tried a different voice. We can talk. I know people in every den from Ridgemont to Brookhaven. You knew one useful official. He sold you before the tea cooled. That answer frightened him more than the broken fingers. He had spent years believing Fenton's greed made the partnership permanent. Now the same greed had placed my hand on his wrist. I pressed the knife point against the table beside his hand. "Who arranged my kidnapping?" He tried to deny it. I broke a third finger. Ryland shouted Fenton's name. The confession came fast after that. Fenton supplied routes, delayed the search, collected $50,000 for the fake rescue, and protected Ryland afterward. They had selected Kieran because his gambling reputation guaranteed the family would blame him before questioning authority. Ryland even described the night itself. He waited until Kieran lost heavily, offered another bottle, and pushed him into a carriage. Fenton delayed the branch patrol until the ransom changed hands, then staged a dramatic rescue after Ryland left through the rear gate. Gareth thanked the man who helped rob him. Mora paid the reward while her son was still unconscious. Ryland grinned while describing that part. He still believed the old victim's shame protected him. The plan worked until the victim returned wearing someone else's face. Ryland offered money and names. I needed neither. He had kidnapped a young man, drained a family, and helped turn Roderick into their creditor. His death removed the kidnapper. Fenton still needed to hand back the money and expose himself. I killed him cleanly and carried his head to the meeting point. The next night, I reached a stone pavilion outside Ridgemont. Fenton arrived with 2 cases and the smile of a man expecting a promotion. He saw Ryland's head on the stone table. The smile survived 1 second longer than it deserved. "Efficient," Fenton whispered. "The money." He opened both cases. $200,000 filled them. I counted only enough to make him nervous. Fenton leaned toward me. "About the headquarters recommendation," Ryland spoke before he died. His face stiffened. I continued. "He described the kidnapping, the ransom, the fake rescue, and your share." Fenton forced a laugh. "Kieran Hollowell was trash. His family had money. We taught him a lesson and put the funds to better use. He had handed over the refund and justified the crime before learning who sat across from him." I lifted the edge of the skin mask. Fenton watched Colby Northcott's face peel away. Kieran Hollowell looked back at him. The crooked official froze. "You," he said. "The trash heir." His eyes dropped to the money cases. Then he glanced at Ryland's head. He reached for the money before he reached for help. Fenton drew a short sword and lunged for the cases. The 2 assistants he had brought to carry the money backed away from him. One dropped the empty transport strap. The other stared at my exposed face and finally connected the kidnapped heir to the dead criminal on the table. Fenton had expected them to protect Alliance authority. Both men chose the pavilion exit. He still chose the money. I caught his blade, stepped outside his reach, and struck the tendons in his wrist. The sword fell. He grabbed for my coat with his other hand, so I turned his momentum and drove him into the stone table. Ryland's head rolled between the cases. Fenton looked at it and finally understood the meeting's correct category. "I'm an Alliance branch leader," he gasped. "I led the entire Alliance. The title doesn't impress me." He could not understand that sentence, which was safer for me. I ended the fight before he could shout. The assistants returned only after the pavilion quieted. One looked at Fenton, then at the open cases, and asked whether he should report an attack. I told him to report exactly what he had witnessed. Branch leader Whitcomb brought money to meet a wanted criminal's killer. He attacked after the disguise came off and died reaching for the cash. The man's face tightened. Reporting the truth would expose his own role, so he chose silence. Fenton's greed brought the money, his contempt exposed the crime, and his own attack finished him. I left the pavilion with $200,000. The money ledger was finally clean. $320,000 had come from the Blackmere safe. $30,000 rebuilt Cormac's guards. $10,000 bought the mask. The recovered $200,000 brought my liquid total to $480,000. The spirit root cost $440,000. Buying it would leave $40,000 and almost no margin. At dawn, I turned the carriage toward Ridgemont's black market. The refund would buy the route. Before I could enjoy that, the martial world was finally preparing to announce that Alistair Varden was dead. I put $440,000 on the counter before the black market elder could enjoy my failure. That afternoon in Ridgemont, he counted the first bundle, then stopped and looked at me. The elder weighed the last bundle. "You found the money in 7 days. You gave me 10, I reminded him. He shut the cash box. "Most men use the extra 3 to fail more slowly." He opened the jade box. The Millennium Spirit Root looked disappointing for its price. It was dry, twisted, and small enough to fit in one hand. $440,000 had purchased something that resembled an elderly carrot. You would expect that price to buy something less similar to firewood. The elder lifted it with both palms anyway. "A normal cultivator could gain 10 years of chi," he said. "A gifted one might reach 15. Force it too quickly and the blocked channels can tear." I took the box before he could add a lecture. The elder's expression had lost its earlier mockery. Perhaps the root chose the right owner. The money made a strong argument. Before sunset, in a sealed mountain cave outside Ridgemont, I ate it. The taste was bitter enough to insult every dollar. Then, the energy hit. Heat flooded my stomach and surged toward the dantian. I dropped into a seated stance and started heavenly pulse circulation before the first wave reached my chest. The two blocked channels resisted. Pressure climbed behind my ribs, my skin flushed, sweat ran down my back and steamed against the cold stone. The root's energy pushed outward like a flood searching for weak walls, while my circulation method compressed it into one narrow route. Pain tore through my shoulders. My right hand struck the cave floor hard enough to crack a knuckle. I kept the pattern moving. One broken rhythm would waste the root, a second could damage the body. There was no healer in the cave and no subordinate to catch me if I collapsed. The first channel opened with a sharp internal snap. Chi burst through my arm. Loose stones jumped. Birds outside the cave scattered from the trees. My left sleeve tore at the shoulder where the sudden pressure swelled through the muscle. Blood ran from my nose and struck the floor between my knees. I checked the pulse with 2 fingers. Too fast, but steady. The body had survived the first gate. The second one sat closer to the heart and carried a worse consequence. If I forced it from the wrong angle, the root would become the most expensive poison in Eastmere. The second blockage fought harder. I forced the energy downward, pulled it through the dantian, and sent it back through the closed path. Heat became pressure. Pressure became a knife beneath the skin. For one ugly moment, the young heart stumbled. The old martial god had died when his chi failed. Now the new body threatened to repeat the joke while I was sitting on the ground beside an overpriced root. I slowed one breath, changed the circulation angle, and drove the refined energy through. The second channel opened. Chi flooded every limb at once. The cave walls shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A burst of force blew the small fire out and sent the jade box skidding across the floor. I stayed seated until the energy settled. Then I measured the result. 20 refined years. Both block channels were open. My injured calf stayed steady when I stood. I drew my sword and sent one controlled slash into the far wall. The cut went 3 times deeper than my strike in the snow grove. The power felt good. Too good. Solving everything alone had made Alistair unbeatable and lonely. I sheathed the sword and left the cave. By the time I returned to the Hollowell estate, Tucker had won a path between the front gate and the training yard. He saw me and ran over. Tucker grabbed my sleeve. "You were gone all night." I noticed. He held up the scorched cloth. "Your clothes are burned. Your face looks different. Did you fight someone?" "A root," I told him. "It was expensive and aggressive." Tucker circled me once. His eyes narrowed at the steadier way I stood. He pointed at me like a detective closing a case. "You found a woman. That's your diagnosis?" Tucker counted on his fingers. "You disappear, return calmer, and refuse details. The evidence is overwhelming." "The woman was dry, twisted, and $440,000, I told him. Tucker's mouth opened. I continued walking. "Try not to become jealous of agriculture." He followed, offended on Celine's behalf, despite Celine having no part in it. At the training yard, Tucker demonstrated the mind art I had assigned. He had improved. His breathing still climbed too high in the chest, but the ki no longer scattered through his arms. I placed 2 fingers against his back and adjusted the circulation route. Tucker stiffened. "Am I dying?" "You're learning. Similar symptoms in your case." He completed the pattern and opened his eyes. "Well? Good!" His shoulders lifted before he hid the reaction by wiping sweat from a forehead that was already dry. I gave him the next sequence of the Southern Tide 7 forms, the practical combat style I had chosen for him. He started practicing immediately. With 20 refined years, Hidden Blades no longer controlled every trip beyond the estate. I also had only $40,000 left, a covert syndicate to protect, and an old death nobody had explained. The news arrived before I could choose which problem came first. That evening, Tucker entered my room without knocking. His face had lost every joke. "Young master," he said, "the martial god is dead." The words were finally public. Alliance messengers had carried the announcement through Eastmere. Alistair Varden had died from a sudden collapse. Mourning banners were being raised across the martial world. I sat beside the low table. Tucker mistook my silence for admiration. "You asked about him when you woke. Did you know him?" "Not as well as I should have. It was the closest truth I could give him." Tucker sat across from me. "People say he had thousands of followers." I answered. "He had thousands of subordinates." Tucker frowned. "That isn't the same thing. Annoying man, correct man. As Alliance leader, I had kept people at a distance because caring openly created leverage for enemies. I won every major war. When death came, I had nobody beside me except an advisor calling for guards." Tucker remained by the door, uncertain whether to leave. I poured 2 cups. "Drink with me," I said. "We'll mourn him." Tucker sat. We drank without jokes. After the first cup, Tucker moved from the opposite side of the table to the seat beside me. He said nothing. He only stayed there. Outside, servants tied mourning cloth to the estate gate. A passing swordsman stopped long enough to bow toward the Grand Marshal Alliance headquarters. Tucker watched through the window, then poured for me before filling his own cup. He did not know he was serving the dead man his toast honored. That secret sat between us, close enough to touch and impossible to share. The young body handled alcohol poorly. After several cups, warmth reached my face and the room shifted half an inch. The martial god had survived poison, assassins, and cult leaders. Kieran Hollowell was losing an argument with rice wine. Tucker raised his cup. To Alistair Varden. I touched mine to it. May he have better company in death than he allowed himself in life. Tucker lowered his cup. That sounds like something a friend should have told him while he was alive. I answered, I know. He did not understand the confession. Tucker also knew when to stop asking. He stayed beside me until the cups were empty. The funeral announcement opened a darker question. Why had the Alliance hidden my death for days? Years later, Dashiell Redgrave, my former advisor still trapped inside the Alliance, gave me his written record of that week. The first page began the morning after my death announcement. At Alliance headquarters in Summit City, Dashiell found Gannon Waverick beside my empty seat. Gannon led the Mooncrest Order and wore mourning white with the confidence of a man who had counted the room before entering. The Alliance needs a successor, Gannon told him. Delay invites chaos. Dashiell saw the purchase immediately. The inner door guards had been replaced. 2 elders hid Mooncrest pins beneath their mourning robes. One old commander started toward Dashiell, heard Gannon clear his throat, and turned away. That coward told him more than a formal vote ever could. Dashiell faced Gannon. Alistair has been dead less than a week. His key collapsed without warning. The healers vanished before I could question them. His body was sealed, and your people already control the doors. Gannon's smile thinned. Careful, Redgrave. Grief can sound like accusation. Dashiell did not argue. He started watching. At the bottom of the page, he wrote one word: assassination. It was suspicion, not proof. Someone had bought the halls before the funeral. That was enough to make the question ugly. The next day, in an Eastmere tavern, I listened to strangers discuss the dead man sitting among them. One swordsman claimed he had witnessed my fight with the battle demon. He had not. I remembered every survivor, and this man's greatest battle appeared to be against the tavern bill. The battle demon was 12 feet tall, he announced. He was 5 feet tall and built like a stubborn barrel. The swordsman spread his arms until he nearly hit a server. I saw the martial god catch the demon's blade barehanded. I had caught it with the broken half of my sword and lost feeling in 2 fingers for a month. The server ducked, saved the drinks, and nodded along because the Alliance inspector was watching. The martial god defeated him with 1 finger. I had used a broken sword, 3 traps, and most of my blood. Another drinker leaned in. I heard Alistair hid an illegal fortune under Alliance headquarters. Millions. The Alliance inspector lifted his cup. More, the first man said at once. He taxed every sect privately. 1 raised cup had just increased my imaginary fortune. The tavern owner heard that claim and glanced toward a new Alliance inspector drinking near the door. He laughed along a little too loudly. A serving girl who had been listening with interest lowered her eyes and moved away. The lie gained weight because 1 official uniform was present to reward agreement. Nobody needed an order. They edited themselves. They praised my strength, stole the pain from my victories, and invented greed to explain the authority they envied. A young martial artist at the next table disagreed. He said Alistair had ended the regional wars and paid compensation from his own treasury. The fake eyewitness shouted him down. 2 patrons switched tables to avoid being associated with the defense. The new regime's story was already changing who felt safe speaking. I corrected none of them. If I revealed myself, every faction in the martial world would either kneel, attack, or try to own the miracle. Kieran's body was stronger now. It was nowhere near ready for that storm. So I finished my drink and left while the fake eyewitness described a battle he had never seen. 20 years of ki sat inside me. My old name was already being divided by men who had waited for it to die. I needed the successor's name, the fate of my loyalists, and enough time to stay hidden while my enemies rewrote my life. The Alliance was starting to rot, so back at the Hollowell estate I gave Tucker a real sword. Weapons were still my favorite answer to emotional problems. Growth remained limited, but the method was consistent. Tucker stood in the training yard and stared at the weapon in his hands. He tested the edge with 1 cautious thumb. This is sharpened. Excellent observation. Tucker lowered the blade. People give final gifts before funerals. Are you dying? You've asked me that after repayment, dinner, training, and now a sword. At this point, my survival feels disrespectful to your theory. He drew the blade halfway, saw his reflection, and smiled before hiding it. I watched him practice the Southern Tide 7 forms. His footwork had improved. His wrists still tightened before every committed strike. As Alistair, I had trained my advisor, my escort, and other elite subordinates from behind a wall of titles. I corrected mistakes, rewarded results, and rarely joked with them. Tucker made that distance look ridiculous. Before I could decide how to reach my old friends, politics arrived at our front gate. The next morning, Osmond Belmont visited Gareth and crossed my path in the reception hall. Celine's father still carried the broken engagement like a contract somebody had misplaced. "Kieran," Osmond said, "I haven't given up on you. That sounds threatening after a cancellation." He ignored the line. "The young people spoke too quickly. The agreement between our families remains." "Celine has the right to choose." Osmond frowned. "You defend her after she embarrassed you?" She was correct about the old Kieran. Forcing her to marry him would punish both of us. Osmond tapped the old agreement tucked inside his sleeve. "You both cancelled the personal match. The promise between Gareth and me remains. Then preserve the friendship and release the people inside it." Gareth, listening from the study door, gave a quiet grunt of approval. Osmond looked between us. The son he once considered the weak link was now refusing to use family pressure against Celine. Osmond kept matchmaking. The friendship argument had lost its sharpest weapon. Tucker was carrying tea behind Osmond. He leaned close enough to whisper, "She's beautiful, wealthy, and talented. Your standards are becoming dangerous." Osmond heard him. "Your servant has sense," he declared. "Former servant," Tucker corrected proudly. "Current subordinate, still very sensible." 2 men had joined the campaign to restore my cancelled engagement before breakfast. Celine was nowhere in the room, and she was still winning. Osmond eventually joined Gareth in the study. Mara called me in when the conversation turned serious. The Eastmere Chamber of Commerce wanted to form a regional martial union. Other regions were clustering while the Grand Martial Alliance prepared to name Alistair's successor. The chamber wanted Osmond as the public leader because the Belmont clan had the best reputation. Gareth considered joining. I asked one question. "What does the chamber gain?" Neither father had a clear answer. That afternoon, Celine came to the Hollowell estate alone. She met me in the rear pavilion, where Tucker could see us from the yard and pretend he was not watching. Celine wore a white training coat and carried herself with the same sharp control as before. She was beautiful enough to make careful men forget the first half of their sentences. 70 years of discipline reduced the damage to one missing word. Celine did not waste time. "My father plans to lead the Eastmere Union. I need you to persuade Gareth to stop him." "Why me?" "Because Gareth listens to you now. The admission cost her." I leaned against the pavilion rail. "You cancelled our marriage because I was useless. Now I'm useful enough for family politics. That's efficient growth." Celine's eyes narrowed. "Enjoy it quietly." "I would, but you came to my house," I answered. Celine's eyes narrowed. "For my father's safety. A noble reason. Still my house." She fought a smile and lost by a fraction. Tucker saw it from the yard and struck the same training post twice as hard. The post had done nothing. It was merely standing where his jealousy could reach. Then she explained the danger. As Alistair, I had banned regional coalitions because they became private armies. My strength had kept ambitious factions under control. With me dead, they were clustering again. Celine had watched one chamber delegate praise Osmond's honor, then asked Belmont guards to secure chamber warehouses before any agreement existed. The title was still imaginary. The cost was already standing at her gate. "If the union fails," she said, "they will hide behind my father. If it succeeds, they will use him until he becomes a target." I asked, "What proof do you have?" Celine's jaw tightened. "None yet. Then begging him to stop will sound like a daughter doubting her father." "He'll defend the decision harder," I told her. Celine's jaw tightened. "So you refuse?" "I refuse your method. Bring me a concrete reason." She stared at me. "You always speak as though people will obey once you decide." "Bad habit. It worked for 70 years. I had said too much." Celine caught the strange phrasing. 70? It felt longer when I was chasing you. Her suspicion turned into disgusted amusement. "Safe." That night, I dreamed of the Alliance Hall. Former allies stood around my throne, waiting for me to stop breathing. I woke before dawn with my hand around an imaginary sword. The dream gave me no answer. It did remind me of one fact. Months earlier, the Eastmere Chamber had tried expanding into a neighboring merchant family's territory using the Blackmere Syndicate as muscle. Then the effort stopped without explanation. Since I had just removed the Blackmere leadership, that abandoned expansion might be the missing reason. At sunrise, I sent a note to Celine. We needed information, not persuasion. That night, Celine and I entered Ridgemont wearing straw hats pulled low over our faces. The WhisperNet operated beneath a warehouse and sold facts to anyone willing to pay before asking whether they were decent. Celine looked at the narrow stairway. "You've used this place before?" "A similar one," I answered. Celine did not let me escape. That answer avoided the question. "Good. You're learning politics." She adjusted her hat. The movement revealed her face for 1 second, and 2 men at the entrance immediately forgot to look threatening. Celine noticed me noticing. Celine tapped the brim of my hat. "Focus, Kieran. I'm focused. Your disguise is losing the argument." She adjusted her own hat. "The hat is fine. The face underneath is expensive," I replied. She stepped on my foot as we entered. Celine whispered, "Keep talking and I'll test whether the pond improved you." I answered, "You came without a pond." Celine replied, Ridgemont has wells. There was the proud beauty I remembered, threatening water damage while paying for political intelligence, flirting through minor violence. Familiar territory. The information broker sat behind a barred window. He named the price before offering a greeting. $15,000. Celine had brought $20,000 from her own preparation fund. Her fingers tightened around the bag. That's robbery, she said. The broker shrugged. Fear costs more when the deadline is close, I murmured. I told you the price would smell it. Celine gave me a look, then placed the money through the bars. The money changed hands, and the broker started talking. The broker explained that the Eastmere Chamber had used Blackmere muscle to invade a neighboring merchant family's territory. That family fought back, and Stellan refused to continue the campaign after taking control. He pushed one trade notice through the bars. It listed burned warehouses and the proposed union, with Osmond's name printed at the top. They made my father the answer before he agreed, Celine said. I saw the shape immediately. The chamber had lost its muscle and needed the Belmonts in front. They're using your father as a shield, I told her. Celine grabbed the remaining $5,000. We leave now. Destroying Roderick had sent the chamber's bill straight to her family. She was halfway up the stairs before the broker finished counting. Before dawn, at the Belmont estate, Celine placed the information in front of Osmond. She named the failed expansion, the neighboring family's retaliation, and the chamber's need for a shield. Then she made him choose whether he wanted a title bought with his family's safety. The next morning, Osmond arrived at the Hollowell estate looking 10 years older and considerably less interested in unions. He had refused the chamber before coming. 2 delegates followed him to the Belmont gate and demanded another meeting. Celine ordered the guards to leave them outside. That visible refusal closed the trap more effectively than a council debate ever could. The chamber lost the Belmont name, and every servant at the gate saw who had recognized the danger first. He gripped my forearm. You protected my family. Celine did. She saw the danger, paid for the information, and confronted you. Celine stood behind him. Her gaze held mine for a second. He found the question, she told her father. I only carried the answer home. You carried it faster, I told her. Celine's mouth tilted. Careful. That almost sounded like praise. I warned her, do not become difficult, Celine replied. You invited Tucker into your life. Your standards are flexible. Celine had once listed my failures before both families. Now she placed part of the success in my hands. Tucker watched from the hall and whispered, You two are becoming suspiciously functional. Celine heard him. Train harder, Tucker. He looked betrayed. She had entered the jealousy list. After the Belmonts left, I took Tucker to the sword ground. Politics had bought one family time. Steele would decide whether Tucker survived long enough to enjoy it. I drew a real blade. Tucker's smile disappeared. We're using sharp ones now? Yes. My funeral theory remains undefeated. His eyes flicked toward Cormac. Captain, witnesses matter. Cormac folded his arms. So does surviving. Tucker looked back at me. The household has become unsupportive. I attacked. He blocked the first cut badly and stumbled. On the second exchange, Tucker retreated in a straight line. I cut off the lane and tapped his shoulder with the flat. Dead, I told him. Tucker complained. That sounded personal. I answered. Your footwork made it easy. I struck his guard again. Steel rang. On the third exchange, Fear locked his elbows and dragged his eyes toward my blade instead of my shoulders. I stopped the edge 1 inch from his face. Tucker froze. The sword reflected in his eyes. 1 drop of sweat ran down the side of his face and stopped at his jaw. Behind him, 2 household guards had paused their own practice. Cormac did not interfere. He understood that fear had to become a choice while the blade was still real. I lowered the sword enough for Tucker to breathe, then attacked again. He flinched, recovered, and caught the cut on his guard. The impact drove him back 3 steps. He remained standing. I kept my voice straight for the next question. Do you still want this life? I asked. Real martial artists bleed, they kill, they watch friends get hurt. You can stop now and remain beside the family. His breathing shook. Then Tucker lowered his sword, reset his feet, and raised it again. I want to stand beside you, he said. I can't do that from behind a door. My blade came back. Good answer. He exhaled and nearly folded from relief. The 2 watching guards lowered their practice blades. Cormac gave Tucker 1 short nod. Tucker saw it, reset his grip, and attacked first. Days later, Tucker found me in the study with a fresh alliance notice. They chose the new leader, he said. Osric Northcott of the High Crest Sword Sect. My calm broke. Osric was cowardly, greedy, and famous for arriving after dangerous battles ended. He had spent years orbiting power without risking himself to earn it. Now the coattail king held my throne. Osric's appointment put my former advisor inside an alliance controlled by a coward. I headed for the city of Greyhaven to follow the propaganda and find out whether he was still alive. Osric Northcott stole one of my wars in a Greyhaven tavern the next day. A storyteller stood on a tavern platform beneath the New Alliance banner. He described the defeat of the Dark Shadow Palace leader and credited Osric with the victory. According to him, Osric broke the enemy formation, rescued the wounded, and forced the palace leader to kneel. You could hear the lie growing stronger every time the crowd rewarded it. In reality, Osric arrived after the fighting ended, complained about the smell, and asked whether the victory feast had started. The storyteller raised his cup. The new alliance leader saved the martial world from darkness. Half the tavern cheered. Then he described Alistair Varden as an aging tyrant who took credit from younger heroes and hid a fortune inside Alliance headquarters. The other half cheered louder. Authority moved faster than truth. Dashiell had warned me about that years ago. Strength could win a battlefield. A title decided who wrote the plaque afterward. Osric now had the title. I had Kieran Hollowell's face, $40,000, and enough chi to start a very bad argument. Punching the storyteller would feel excellent and accomplish nothing. So I stayed seated and listened for names. Mooncrest Order speakers repeated the story. Iron Stallion Hallmen supported them. Those two factions had once stood behind me in every major vote. Now, they were helping erase me. The betrayal carried me toward Crosswind Tavern, the refuge I had used whenever Alliance ceremony became unbearable. That afternoon, I entered the old tavern beneath a low hat. Inside, the front room looked almost unchanged. Dark tables still stood near the windows. One familiar dent marked the counter where Lachlan Hardwick, my former escort, had once slammed an assassin's head. Even the Sour House wine smelled faithful. A broad man behind the bar turned toward me. Lachlan. He had been my personal escort for 20 years. He slept outside my door during war and insulted every cook who served me cold food. Gray had reached his beard. Weariness had reached his eyes. A clerk called him owner. Lachlan had left the Alliance and bought the tavern. He did not recognize me. Sit anywhere, he told me. Kitchen is slow. Wine is honest. I chose my old table in the rear corner. Lachlan's hand paused on a cup. He looked at the seat, then at me. Something about the choice bothered him, but Kieran's young face supplied no answer. That table belonged to a difficult customer, Lachlan said. Did he pay? I asked. He wiped one thumb across an old cup mark. Never enough. Then I'll improve the tradition. I placed coins on the table. Lachlan almost smiled. He brought the wine himself. For several minutes I could have told him. Lachlan still checked the door every time it opened. He kept one hand beneath the counter where an old short sword rested. A young server dropped a cup, and he caught the tray before it hit without looking away from the entrance. Leaving the Alliance had changed his title. It had not removed the escort from his body. I tested him with a small detail. The difficult customer preferred the sour wine warmed once, then cooled. Lachlan stared at me. Who told you that? A man with poor taste. His hand tightened around the cup. The answer brought him close to recognition, but my face, age, and chi contradicted every impossible guess. I had placed the truth in front of him and watched reason protect the secret. One sentence would have returned my name to the room. Lachlan would have believed the details nobody else knew. He might have drawn his sword and followed me before the cup settled. That risk kept my mouth shut. If he followed, Osric's people would notice. If I revealed the reincarnation, the rumor could reach the Alliance before this body could survive the result. My old companion deserved more than being turned into bait for my loneliness. The door opened before I finished the first cup. Dashiell Redgrave entered wearing plain clothes and the posture of a man who had not slept since my death. My former advisor crossed the tavern and embraced Lachlan. I lowered my hat. They sat 2 tables away. Lachlan poured without asking. You should leave Summit City. Dashiell shook his head. If we all leave, they own the Alliance without resistance. They already own it. They own offices. Alistair built more than offices. Hearing my name from him tightened something in my chest. Lachlan looked toward the window. I should have spent more time with him outside missions. Dashiell's voice softened. We all thought there would be another year. Lachlan rubbed the old cut mark. He never stayed after meetings. We never asked him to, Dashiell said. Lachlan asked, would he have said yes? Dashiell looked at my old table. We spent 30 years assuming no. These were the men I had trusted with armies and secrets. Neither had known how to ask me for an ordinary evening. I had trained them to keep distance, then died wondering why the room was empty. Lachlan asked, who turned? Dashiell answered plainly. Gannon Waverick controls Mooncrest. Iron Stallion Hall pledged to Osric. Several elders were bought before Alistair died. And the death? Assassination, Dashiell said. I cannot prove the method yet. My fingers tightened around the cup. Then come with me, Lachlan said. We can investigate outside their walls. Dashiell looked exhausted enough to agree. He did not. I stay, he said. The Alliance still shelters smaller clans. Osric will use it to crush anyone who resists. I can slow him. I can also find who killed Alistair. Lachlan leaned back. They'll humiliate you until you leave. Then they will become tired before I do. Quiet, precise, and more stubborn than men twice his size. My closest men had stayed loyal. The uglier question was how many people inside the Alliance had helped prepare my death. I finished my wine and stood. Lachlan glanced over. Leaving already? The kitchen was slow, the wine was honest. His eyes searched my face again. For 1 second I thought he might recognize the rhythm of the answer. Then the moment passed. I walked out without my name. Tucker waited across the street beside our carriage. He took one look at me and stopped complaining about the cold. We rode in silence until Greyhaven disappeared behind us. Then Tucker cleared his throat. You look like a normal human. That sounds insulting. Usually you look like a calm murder problem. Today you look sad. I turned toward the window. Tucker did not ask who the men were. He pushed a wrapped meat pie into my hand. Eat, he said. You become unbearable when hungry. I took the pie. By the time we reached Eastmere, I had made my choice. Chasing the Alliance immediately would expose my identity, endanger Dashiell and Lachlan, and leave the Hollowells defenseless. I could not reclaim the old throne with 20 years of key and one talented subordinate, so I would build a new power base. The Hollowell clan had land, a recovering guard force, and an honorable patriarch. Its reputation remained low enough that nobody feared its growth yet. I would turn it into a shield before Osric's regime looked toward Eastmere. The next morning, in my father's study, I asked my parents for permission to create a 20-person sword squad. My father set down his tea. 20? Trained separately from the household guards. Fast, mobile, loyal to the clan. My mother watched me. How much will it cost? More than father wants and less than our enemies. My father almost smiled. That's not a number. I'll find someone better with numbers. My parents exchanged a look. Before the pond, every request from Kieran had meant gambling money or another gift for Celine. This request put soldiers in the yard instead. My father nodded. You have my permission. My mother added, and my condition, you eat before morning training. The martial god had commanded armies. His new mother had defeated him with breakfast. Tucker was waiting outside the study. I heard 20-person squad, he said. I assume I'm captain. You're not joining. His face collapsed before I finished. I have separate plans for you, I told him. Tucker pointed toward the yard. That's what men say before replacing loyal subordinates with taller ones. You're training directly under me. Tucker recovered at once. A superior position, I knew that. Reed's new title added speed to Tucker's next run. I told my father I would make the Hollowell clan the strongest force in the Central Plains. He stared at me. My mother placed breakfast in front of me and told me to start by surviving the eggs. 3 days later, the recruitment gate opened. About 100 applicants arrived for 20 positions. They filled the front yard, the road, and part of the outer courtyard. Some were former guards. Others were young martial artists who had heard about Brandon's defeat and the wages returning to Hollowell soldiers. Months earlier, men had hidden their association with the trash heir. Now they argued for a chance to serve him. I walked onto the training platform. Whispers followed. One applicant called me a gambler under his breath. Another told him to be quiet because I had broken Brandon Blackmere with my bare hands. A third stared at Cormac's new equipment and decided the rumors about money were true. I let them talk. You know who I was, I told the crowd. Judge the man standing here. If you need a perfect past, leave. If you want hard training, real pay, and enemies who will try to kill you, stay. 7 men left. They had listened. The test punished lone wolves. Cormac sent veteran guards into each group with padded blades. Applicants who chased individual wins looked impressive for 10 seconds, then got struck from behind. I removed them. Tucker helped mark results and tried to create an official poor manners category after one man called him a servant. I crossed it out. He wrote it back in the margin. Reed Halbrook stood out. The 23-year-old former military instructor gave up his lead to catch a slipping candidate. Then he recovered and finished near the front. I asked why he wanted the position. Reed answered. The men I taught never cared about martial skill. I want to know how far someone ordinary can go under a real master. No flattery, no family name. I appointed him captain. Reed bowed once and immediately began arranging the chosen recruits. Cormac watched from the gate and gave the smallest nod. The rejected applicants who had dismissed Reed as plain started asking what answer he had given me. The title changed how the yard saw him before he issued a single command. Tucker, standing beside the platform, looked personally betrayed by Reed's existence. He's been here 4 hours, Tucker muttered. Already, Captain. I've suffered for years. Your suffering isn't a leadership credential, I told him. Tucker folded his arms. Then I suffered inefficiently. By sunset, 20 recruits stood in formation beneath the Hollowell banner. 90 rejected applicants watched from outside the gate. My parents stood on the steps. Cormac inspected the new line like a veteran trying not to show approval. Before this, Eastmere called me a disgraced heir. Now 100 people had shown up because 20 places beside me existed. I thought recruits would make the Hollowells safer. Their first paid job would put professional killers in a canyon, and one of my men had never taken a life. 20 recruits discovered my 6-hour warm-up the morning after recruitment. Half the recruits thought I was joking. Reed did not. At sunrise, he stood at the front of the 20-man line and repeated my order. Run until young Master Hollowell tells us to stop. Tucker folded his arms beside me. Interesting. He gets a complete sentence. I usually get insults. He arrived on time, I answered. Tucker pressed a hand to his chest. I've been loyal for 10 years. You were late today. Tucker looked at Reed as though punctuality were romantic theft. The recruits ran, climbed, carried stones, practiced footwork, and learned that a sword arm attached to weak legs was decorative. By the 4th hour, 3 men had vomited. By the 6th, Reed was still upright through pure refusal. I called the line together. Talent matters, I told them. Obsession matters more. The man who trains 2 hours loses to the man who trains 6. The man who trains 6 loses to the man who uses those hours correctly, Reed asked. And the secret behind your change? I stopped wasting days. It was incomplete and true. Tucker raised his hand. I also stopped wasting days. You spent yesterday arguing about Reed's height. Important tactical comparison. The recruits laughed. Reed did too. Tucker immediately trained harder to punish everyone for enjoying it. The rivalry was improving Tucker, so I let it run. For several weeks, the squad learned to move as one unit. I taught Reed how to read the front line. Tucker learned to attack without announcing fear through his shoulders. The others learned to protect gaps instead of chasing individual glory. We trained with uneven numbers. 10 recruits held a gate against the other 10. Then I removed 2 defenders without warning. Reed adapted by narrowing the line. Tucker adapted by shouting at everyone, which was less elegant but surprisingly effective. When a recruit dropped his sword, the nearest man learned to cover him before retrieving it. Every mistake became visible immediately. One afternoon, I knocked Reed down 6 times with the same opening. On the 7th, he refused the bait and struck my sleeve. The entire line cheered. Tucker trained until dark because somebody else had touched me first. Competitive affection was strange, but useful. Then the food bill arrived. Later that week, I met Ansel Dunwell in his office. The long-serving Hollowell manager placed a ledger on the desk and looked at me over thin spectacles. Ansel had kept the estate alive while Kieran drained it. He knew exactly how many meals 20 hungry recruits could turn into a crisis. Young master, Ansel said, your squad will consume the operating fund in 3 months. I looked at the ledger. That seems aggressive. Ansel tapped the total. They eat aggressively. He showed me the total. Training gear, food, medicine, wages, repairs. The numbers attacked from every column. Armies had never sent me grocery totals. A page of expenses had found my weak side. I'm bad at this, I admitted. Ansel's spectacles lowered slightly. Kieran had ignored his warnings, blamed him for shortages, and never apologized. I pushed the ledger back. I ignored the work you did while this family was falling. That was wrong. The squad needs a dedicated manager, someone who can make $30,000 support 20 men. Ansel's hand rested on the ledger. I know one, he said. He's talented. He's also difficult. Tucker remains employed. I can survive difficult. Tucker, waiting outside, shouted, I heard that. The next morning, Tucker and I traveled into the hills because Ansel's candidate lived in a shack halfway up a mountain. Tucker inspected the leaning roof. This is your financial expert? His own finances are a poor advertisement. A man opened the door before we knocked. Marlowe Ainsworth was a scholar in his 30s with sharp eyes, plain clothes, and ink on 2 fingers. He looked at the Hollowell crest, then at Tucker's sword. Ansel sent you, Marlowe said. His voice was measured and dry. He did not bow. I liked him already. Inside, one wall held books, another held an abacus and a short blade. Marlowe poured no tea. He already knew the size of the Hollowell estate and the number of guards we had rehired. He also knew the public estimate of our remaining debt. Ansel had sent only our names. Marlowe had gathered the rest before we climbed the mountain. The shack advertised failure. The questions waiting inside advertised preparation. Tucker noticed a stack of unpaid notices beneath the abacus. You manage money? Marlowe looked at him. Other people's. Comforting. You're still here. Tucker moved 1 inch closer to me. Marlowe had won the first exchange without changing his tone. You want a manager, he said. You should know I killed my former employer. Tucker took 1 full step behind me. Why? I asked. Marlowe's expression closed. That part is mine. Marlowe kept the reason private. I did not force it. A liar would have polished the first impression. Can you manage $30,000 for 20 men? I asked. Marlowe answered without blinking. Yes. Can you steal from me? His expression stayed flat. Yes, Tucker whispered. Strong interview, Marlowe continued. You wouldn't notice until too late. I leaned back in the chair. Then don't make me notice. He glanced at the sword by my side. You're not afraid I'll kill you? I'm not weak enough to die from an abacus. Marlowe's mouth moved at one corner. That depends how I throw it. I hired him before Tucker could object. When Marlowe returned to the Hollowell estate, Ansel met him in the front hall. The old manager lost his dry expression. You came back, Ansel said. Marlowe looked down. I was invited. Neither man explained the history. Ansel gripped Marlowe's shoulder once, then released it before emotion became public. That evening, Marlowe asked me to share a drink. For the position? I asked. For returning me to my teacher's house without asking me to beg. We drank one cup. Then I gave him the $30,000 operating bag. Marlowe weighed it in his hand. 20 men, 3 months. Make it longer. Probably. Tucker nearly dropped his cup. Probably? Marlowe looked at him. Certainty costs extra. 2 months later, the squad moved like a unit. They still lacked battlefield experience. No amount of training replaced the moment an enemy blade came toward a real throat. Marlowe solved the money problem and brought the next one into my study. Heightrail Trading Company, a merchant client, needs a 10-day escort, he said. $20,000. The fee was too high for an ordinary route. Why us? I asked. Marlowe tapped the client's seal. He couldn't hire a famous group in time. He thinks our reputation is cheap enough to risk. And you? Marlowe tapped the contract. I think danger is practical training that pays us. I accepted. The Heightrail merchant met us beside 6 loaded carts and looked at my young squad with immediate regret. Only 20? He asked. Reed answered before I did. 21 with young Master Hollowell. The merchant looked at me, then at the recruits. I was told the Hollowell guard force had experience. You hired the sword squad, I said. You'll receive the sword squad. He considered canceling. The $20,000 fee and his deadline kept him quiet. 3 days into the route, Tucker rode beside the lead cart and complained that real escort work was boring. Nothing has happened, he said. The canyon ahead narrowed between high stone walls. I felt movement above us. Thank you, I told Tucker. You summoned them. Masked men stepped onto the road in front of the carts. More appeared behind us. They moved in organized groups, wore matching armor beneath travel cloaks, and carried weapons too clean for common bandits. The merchant's face drained. The recruits reached for swords. Several hands shook. Reed struck the nearest shield with his palm and shouted the front man's name. Panic had somewhere useful to go. Formation, I ordered. Reed repeated the command and split the squad around the carts. He placed the strongest shields at the front, 2 men on each wheel, and Tucker beside the left flank. The first arrows came down. Our men raised shields on time. 2 arrows struck wood. One passed between carts and cut a recruit's ear. He flinched but stayed in position because Reed shouted his name before Panic could move his feet. The Heightrail merchant crouched behind a wheel and watched the same inexperienced squad he had doubted close every gap around his cargo. A second volley came from the right ridge. Tucker spotted the angle and pulled one recruit down before an arrow crossed his throat. The recruit looked at him differently after that. Tucker had entered the mission as the commander's loud companion. One fast hand made him a senior fighter in the boy's eyes. The masked force charged. Their front rank carried hooked blades meant to pull shields aside. The second rank carried spears. Ordinary bandits rushed for valuables. These men attacked the formation first. Somebody had paid for professionals, or the cargo mattered far more than the merchant admitted. I stored the question. Surviving the first impact came first. I met the front line before it reached the carts. One attacker swung for my neck. I stepped under the blade, cut his thigh, and turned into the second man. My sword struck his guard, slid down, and opened the space beneath his arm. 2 men fell. The recruits saw it. I deliberately used the Moonfall sword art, the Hollowell family's supposedly average style. Its opening cut was simple. Its footwork was predictable. In a master's hands, the simple cut arrived early, and the familiar footwork invited the wrong defense. A raider recognized the form and laughed. Hollowell trash. I invited his attack with the exact opening he expected. He committed. I changed the angle inside the same form and cut him down before his smile finished. Reed saw the adjustment. His eyes widened, then sharpened. He shouted the correction to the squad. 3 recruits copied it. The left flank held. The Heightrail merchant lifted his head from behind the cart. He had seen the Hollowell crest and assumed cheap protection. Now he watched the same family style split a professional front line. One wounded raider tried to crawl away from the formation, while another shouted that the reports about Kieran were wrong. Reed heard that shout and repeated the Moonfall command louder. The recruits needed the enemy's fear as much as my instruction. Cormac had taught several of these men the family art before they entered my squad. Several had blamed the technique for every old defeat. Watching it work under pressure removed that excuse. Their footwork sharpened because belief finally matched the lesson. One recruit who had called Moonfall outdated during selection reset his grip and copied my angle. Another pulled the Hollowell crest on his sleeve into view instead of hiding it beneath his guard. Reed saw both reactions and drove the formation forward. Tucker parried one raider and stumbled under the second. He recovered, but 2 more men closed around him. I started toward him. I stopped. Saving every recruit would build spectators again. Tucker, I called, find the opening. He heard me. The raider leader rushed from the front with a heavy blade, certain my attention had slipped. I turned the moonfall finishing cut through his guard and dropped him in front of the squad. His confidence vanished before his body hit the ground. The raider leader was down, but the fight was still alive. Tucker stood alone against 4 armed men. I had glimpsed unfamiliar marks beneath their armor, but there was no time to inspect them while he was surrounded. The canyon fight continued, and Tucker was still locked with 4 raiders. 2 attacked from the front, 1 circled left. The 4th waited for fear to turn Tucker's back. A month earlier, Tucker would have watched the blades instead of the bodies holding them. Now he watched shoulders and hips. The first raider cut high. Tucker raised his guard too early, exactly as the man expected. The second attacker drove in low. Tucker changed the angle at the last instant. His sword slid off the high strike and dropped into the second man's path. Steel entered beneath the ribs. Tucker froze for half a breath. The third raider took that opening. Reed shouted his name. Tucker pulled free, turned, and used the second Southern Tide form. The cut caught the attacker across the chest. He fell against the canyon wall. The first man attacked again. Tucker stepped inside and struck the throat. The 4th tried to run past him toward a wounded recruit. Tucker chased and cut him down before he reached the boy. 4 men lay around him. You could see the exact second victory stopped feeling good. Tucker stood in the middle with both hands locked around the sword. "Young master," he called. "I think I found the opening. You took your time." Relief flickered across his face. Then he looked down. The joke left the scene. I cleared the remaining raider corps while Reed organized the squad. Several recruits were bleeding. One had a deep cut across the shoulder. Another had taken an arrow through the outer thigh. Reed moved from man to man, assigning pressure cloths, guards, and positions without waiting for praise. Reed's field commands made the title visible. The surviving attackers broke when their leader fell and the carts remained protected. Some fled into the hills. Others dropped weapons and surrendered. Reed did not let the rookies scatter after them. He slammed the flat of his sword against one recruit's shield and ordered the line closed. That saved the squad from turning victory into an ambush. 2 raiders hiding behind the rocks released a final volley, but the restored formation caught it. One arrow struck Reed's shoulder guard and spun him halfway around. He stayed on his feet and kept giving orders. The merchant's chief driver climbed from beneath a cart and counted his people aloud. Every answer came back. He had spent the battle expecting one of the young escorts to die for his cargo. Hearing all the voices changed his fear into disbelief. I did not chase far. The mission mattered more than body count. When the canyon quieted, I found Tucker still standing beside the 4 men he had killed. His face had gone gray. "I killed them," Tucker said. "Yes," I answered. He looked at his sword. "I thought training would make it feel different. Training makes you capable. It doesn't make death pleasant." I pointed toward the wounded recruit the 4th raider had been reaching. The boy was alive because Tucker moved. Then I pointed at the other 2 men he had protected on the flank. They were helping each other bind wounds. "Your choice kept them breathing," I said. "Do you still want this life?" Tucker's eyes stayed on his comrades. He swallowed and nodded. "Yes." "Good." I gripped his shoulder. "I am proud of you." Tucker's face broke for 1 second. He looked away before tears could finish forming. Reed stopped giving orders long enough to meet my eyes. I faced the whole squad. "No deaths," I said. "You held formation, protected the client, and carried your wounded. I am proud of all of you." The height rail merchant reread the casualty count twice. Then he bowed to Reed, Tucker, and the wounded line instead of bowing only to me. He had hired one famous heir and discovered a squad. One wounded recruit crossed to Tucker and silently offered him water. Tucker took it, then sent the boy back to help the men still bleeding. The recruit obeyed without looking at me. Reed called Tucker's name from the wounded line. Tucker finally loosened his grip on the sword and moved. Shock still gripped him. Responsibility gave his hands something useful to do. Only then did we inspect the attackers properly. Distinctive wanted marks were stamped beneath their armor. The group was known as the Beast Squad, a professional raider force with government bounties. The marks explained their equipment, discipline, and suspiciously high escort fee. Who sent them and what inside the cargo had attracted them remained open. We completed the delivery. A few days later, back at the estate, Marlowe opened an $80,000 bounty bag on my desk. The original escort paid $20,000. The wanted marks added $60,000. Tucker stared at the money. "I killed 4 men and the accountant gets the bag." He put both palms on the desk like he might appeal the ruling. Marlowe moved the bag 1 inch farther away. Marlowe counted without looking up. "Kill 8 next time. The bag still comes to me." Tucker turned to Reed. "He's worse than you," Reed answered. "I was never competing." Tucker looked personally abandoned. I pushed the money toward Marlowe. "Use it for wages, medicine, equipment, and the next contract." Marlowe stopped counting. "You hand me $80,000 without asking for a written breakdown?" Ansel stood near the door and watched the bag change hands. He had spent years begging Kieran to stop touching household funds. Now the new Kieran gave a confessed killer control of fresh money without hovering over every coin. The old manager looked at Marlowe, and Marlowe straightened under that quiet expectation. I hired you to manage, I reminded him. Marlowe rested one hand on the money bag. You also hired me after I admitted killing my last employer. Do not make the story repetitive. His dry expression cracked. Then Marlowe closed the bag. I will earn the trust you're giving before you say it aloud. Ansel's shoulders eased. I needed allies who pushed back, not furniture with swords. The squad's success reached farther than Eastmere. The same written record from Dashiell reached its next dated entry that week at Alliance headquarters. Quillen Sutterfield, Osric's new advisor, summoned Dashiell into the central hall. Quillen was a narrow man with a perfect robe and a grievance preserved for years. 7.5 minutes, Quillen said. Dashiell stood before him. What? That's how long you made me wait outside Alistair's office 12 years ago. Continental power had changed hands, and this man had brought a stopwatch grievance to the throne. Elite-level pettiness. Almost admirable. Quillen ordered Dashiell to pour his tea, carry documents, and repeat the new advisor's full title before every reply. Several officers watched. Men who once took Dashiell's orders kept their eyes down. He made Dashiell stand beside the chair while younger clerks sat. Then he deliberately spilled tea across a report and ordered Dashiell to copy it again before sunset. The report concerned border defenses Dashiell had designed himself. Quillen changed nothing useful. He only wanted the old advisor's scene doing servant work. One officer finally looked up. Shane crossed his face, but fear kept him seated. Quillen noticed and smiled wider. Every bowed head told him who still feared the new regime. Dashiell obeyed. Quillen leaned back and ordered more tea, treating the bow as surrender. Dashiell recorded a different conclusion. Every humiliation bought him another day inside the Alliance, another face to watch, and another chance to find who killed Alistair. The 7-minute grudge had mistaken patience for surrender. While Dashiell endured Summit City, the Hollowell squad received its next contract. The protection job began at the Eastmere Chamber of Commerce, where a merchant had not slept in days. His hands shook around a sealed agreement. The Iron Banner Union wanted him to abandon a business contract. When he refused, black-clad men delivered threats to his wife and children. They said they would take my signing hand, the merchant told me. Then they sent the knife they would use. He placed the knife on the desk. I looked at the knife. We'll escort you, I said. Hours later, on the road outside Eastmere, roughly 200 Iron Banner men surrounded the merchant's carriage. Black coats filled both sides of the road. More men blocked the trees. Their leader stood ahead with a curved sword. His relaxed smile belonged to a man who had never faced a force he couldn't outnumber. Red cloth strips marked every Iron Banner weapon. The merchant recognized the same symbol from the threats against his family. Several men carried hooks for dragging guards from horses. Others held ropes expecting prisoners. They had staged the road as a public lesson for anyone who refused their contracts. The squad reacted in layers. 2 rookies went pale. Reed measured the tree line and shifted 5 men toward the rear wheel. Tucker looked at the merchant's hands, then at the boss's curved sword. He understood exactly which threat had brought us here. The merchant saw them and grabbed my sleeve. Cancel the commission, he said. Take your men and leave. I'll sign whatever they want. He released my sleeve and turned toward the gang, ready to surrender for his family. The Iron Banner boss laughed. Smart choice. We only need the hand that signs. The rest of him can go home. Tucker's grip tightened on his sword. Reed moved the squad around the carriage without waiting for a second order. The boss looked at our 20 men and dismissed us. He offered Reed a bag of coins to move the squad aside. Reed did not touch it. Then the boss offered Tucker twice as much because he mistook the loudest man for the easiest one to buy. Tucker asked whether the payment included dental work after I broke the boss's face. The recruits laughed once, and their fear loosened enough for formation. Hollowell escorts? I heard your young master plays soldier now. I stepped in front of the carriage. The merchant pulled at my sleeve again. Please, my family needs me alive. Then trust the escort you hired. I faced the squad. Watch closely, I told them. This is how a real martial artist handles trash. The Iron Banner boss raised his sword. Spears lowered in the first row. Blades cleared in the second. Men at the rear shouted the Union's name, expecting noise to do the work before steel arrived. Reed planted the squad's shields around the carriage. Tucker placed himself beside the merchant instead of chasing the front, proving the canyon lesson had stayed with him. 200 men charged. I released my key. The pressure rolled across the road and hit the front line hard enough to break their rhythm. Smiles vanished. Boots stumbled. The boss's sword stopped halfway down. Tucker saw my expression change and moved the merchant behind the formation. Danger alarm, he muttered. Then I stepped toward the mob. The Iron Banner charge hit seconds after I released my key. Their front line had already lost its rhythm. I took the space before they recovered. The first man swung a cleaver at my shoulder. I caught the flat of the blade, turned his wrist, and sent him into the 2 men behind him. The gap opened. I entered it. 20 years of refined ki moved through channels that had finally stopped fighting me. My sword crossed one guard and reversed into the next. Then it struck a third man's weapon hard enough to tear it from his hand. A spear came from the rear rank. I caught the shaft beneath my arm, pulled its owner forward, and used him to block the next swing. 2 attackers crashed together. Before either recovered, I struck the spear butt into a fourth man's chest and opened another lane through the formation. The Iron Banner men kept trying to use the same advantage. More bodies, more pressure. Each time I redirected the first row into the second. Their numbers began slowing them instead of helping. Men at the rear could hear orders but could not see why the front kept falling. Confusion spread faster than courage. Their front ranks became obstacles for everyone behind them. I stepped onto a fallen shield and drove forward. 5 men tried to surround me. I broke the circle before it closed. 1 lost his sword. Another lost the courage to pick it up. The third turned and collided with his own reinforcements. Behind me, the Hollowell sword squad held formation around the carriage. Reed called distances. Tucker guarded the merchant and watched my footwork instead of chasing the fight. The recruits had orders to observe unless the line reached them. I cut through the front commander. The left side hesitated. I struck the man carrying their signal flag. The rear ranks lost their timing. The Iron Banner boss shouted from behind his men. "Close in! He can't fight all of you!" The claim was technically correct. His position far behind the line advertised that he did not believe his own order. The front line noticed. A young gangster looked back at his leader. Another followed his gaze. Their charge slowed because fear had finally found the correct direction. I reached the boss before he expected me. He shoved 2 men into my path and turned to run. The hand-cutting comedian had discovered an urgent appointment elsewhere. I knocked the first shield aside, stepped past the second man, and caught the boss by the back of his coat. He twisted with a hidden knife. I struck his wrist, drove him to one knee, and placed my blade against his throat. "Call them off," he gasped. "We can negotiate. You had 200 men for that." He looked toward the merchant. "I'll leave his family alone." The merchant and the squad heard him offer mercy to the family he had threatened while kneeling in the dirt. The boss reached for the knife again. I ended him before the second mistake finished. His body fell where the front ranks could see it. The nearest surviving captain raised his sword and tried to inherit command. 3 men looked at him. Then they looked at their dead boss and at the path I had cut through the formation. The captain lowered his arm before giving the order. Nobody wanted the dead boss's command. 1 lieutenant farther back shouted for the men to hold. The fighters beside him backed away instead. A club landed at his feet. He looked at the dead boss, looked at me, and placed his own sword beside the club. 1 Iron Banner man dropped his weapon. A second backed away. The surrender started at the front and moved backward. Men who could not see me heard steel hitting dirt and copied the sound. 1 rear captain threatened the first deserter. 3 men beside him disarmed anyway, and his authority lasted 1 heartbeat longer than his boss's. Then steel began striking dirt across the formation. Swords, clubs, and axes fell in uneven waves until roughly 150 survivors stood unarmed. You have never heard relief until you hear an enemy army disarm itself. The sound reached the carriage like rough rain. 1 recruit counted the first 10 dropped blades, lost track, and simply stared. Reed kept his sword raised until the last cluster disarmed. Tucker moved the merchant farther back because surrendering men could still panic. The merchant's driver, who had been shaking under the carriage, crawled out and sat in the road when he saw the weapons. Several survivors raised empty hands before their swords finished bouncing. The men who had arrived with hooks and ropes now waited for 20 recruits to tell them where to stand. Reed called the first order. They obeyed him before looking toward their own captains. 1 recruit glanced from our 20-man formation to the 150 unarmed survivors. His sword hand stopped shaking. The lesson had moved from my mouth into his bones. Their numerical confidence had lasted exactly as long as the man hiding behind it. Tucker looked over the surrendered mob. "Do we have enough rope?" "No." "Good. I was worried this would become administrative." The merchant stepped from behind the carriage. His eyes moved from the dead boss to the weapons covering the road. "What happens now?" he asked. "You finished the contract they tried to stop." He blinked. "Now? We're already on the road." Behind him, the drivers began lifting the reins before the surrendered men had finished kneeling. We treated 200 enemies like a delay in traffic. Reed ordered the survivors to move away from the weapons. 2 recruits collected the Iron Banner insignia. Tucker returned the merchant's signing knife and suggested he use it to open lunch. The Iron Banner survivors obeyed Reed without looking at their own captains. 1 man tried to keep a dagger inside his boot. A recruit spotted it, removed it, and sent him to the far end of the line without waiting for me. The merchant walked to the dead boss, looked at the curved sword meant for his hand, and kicked it into the ditch. Then he signed the original contract in full view of the surrendered men. The hand they had promised to cut finished the deal anyway. A nearby Iron Banner captain watched the ink dry, then looked at his own empty hand. The threat had returned to the people who made it. For the first time since hiring us, the merchant laughed. We completed the contract before sunset. On the return trip, the recruits watched me differently. They had obeyed because I was their commander. Now they had seen an entire mob obey because I removed its courage. The recruits had seen command without a title. I would still have to earn their trust on the next road. Back at the Hollowell estate, 3 missions later, success had scars and more money than Marlowe forecast. Reed carried a cut across his forearm. Tucker had 2 healing ribs from shielding a younger recruit. On the 3rd job, the squad carried an injured client through rain while fighting off pursuers. The household adapted with them. Mara kept bandages by the kitchen, and Gareth waited at the gate whenever a mission ran late. Former guards and new recruits stopped eating at separate tables. Shared wounds had settled that argument faster than any speech. The training yard filled before sunrise, and paid work kept filling Marlowe's schedule. That success tempted him into my study with a ledger. "We can support 80 men, he said. "No." Marlowe tapped the unopened cover. "You answered before reading it. The first 20 aren't ready to teach 80. 40 then." I kept the ledger closed. 40. He leaned back. "You negotiated against yourself." I arrived at my number. "You merely made it feel expensive." Marlowe's eyes narrowed with approval. "Most young masters hear applause and buy a larger chair. I've sat in the largest chair. It was uncomfortable and everybody lied nearby." The next morning, Reed chose 4 men and made each teach the opening footwork. Tucker appointed himself their supervisor before anyone could stop him. That night, at a lakeside meeting outside Eastmere, Stellan brought the new alliance to our doorstep. He arrived alone, wore plain clothes, and checked the shore twice before sitting across from me. The Blackmere Syndicate had stabilized under his leadership, but the cover remained fragile. Stellan had faced Roderick's extermination order without blinking. Weston Northcott had made him check an empty shoreline twice. That told me how far the new alliance's reach already felt. Stellan placed a sealed invitation between us. The Blackmere crest appeared beneath the alliance seal, making the syndicate look like a willing host. Inside, every major Eastmere faction was ordered to attend with senior representatives. Refusal would be recorded and sent to alliance headquarters. The envoy had turned one banquet into a regional obedience test before setting foot in the area. "Weston Northcott is coming," Stellan said. He was one of Osric's many sons, and the envoy now extending the new alliance leader's reach into Eastmere. Stellan kept one palm on the sealed invitation, as though the paper might move by itself. "What does he want?" I asked. "He ordered every major sect and clan leader in the region to attend a banquet. The Honest Alliance branch leader refused to organize it. Weston chose the Blackmere Syndicate instead. The faction I secretly controlled had been selected as the stage for the Coattail King's son. Refusing would expose Stellan as disobedient. Accepting would bring Weston, his guards, and every important Eastmere leader into one building tied to my hidden asset." Stellan watched me. "I can delay him." "No, keep the threat close," I told him. He folded the invitation once. "Hosting him increases the chance he sees through the cover. It also lets us choose the doors, the servants, the seating, and the exits." Stellan asked, "And if he brings more men than we expect?" I answered. "They still enter through our doors." Stellan pressed. "And if he questions the cover?" I told him. "Answer as Roderick would have. Greedy, obedient, and slightly offended." Stellan's mouth moved at one corner. "I can manage offended." Stellan unfolded a rough guest list. Celine's family was included. So were 3 clans that had mocked the Hollowells during our decline. The honest branch leader's name was absent, which meant Weston intended to punish refusal by erasing the man from the regional table. Every local relationship I had spent months repairing would be placed in one room under Osric's family seal. Stellan considered that. "You intend to attend?" "I intend to know exactly what he wants before he leaves." He nodded, then hesitated. "I came personally because I didn't trust a messenger." "Next time, use a trusted proxy. If every warning requires your face, somebody will eventually connect us." Stellan's expression tightened. "Trust is expensive in the syndicate. Then spend some. I trusted you with the organization. Return the favor." I looked at Stellan. "Host the banquet."